Okay. Oop, are we? Okay. I'd like to call this meeting to order at
Okay, all right, that's fine.
6:30.
6:30.
Thank you.
Will the secretary please call the roll? And Lisa is not here. So,
I'm here. Davalos,
yeah.
Mellon,
Laura will not be joining us this evening. She's unable to attend.
Wimet.
Here.
Rastrelli.
Here.
Wellington.
Here.
Yaffe here. Vote.
Okay. Do we have anyone present this evening who wishes to address the board? We have Ron Salsky, who would like to come up. The Board of Education welcomes citizen input. Citizens are reminded to limit their comments to 3 minutes, and also that matters regarding employees or confidential student matters will not be allowed, nor will the board respond. Welcome, Mr. Salsky.
Thank you. I'll make this really quick here so you can move on with your board. I'm Ron Salsky again at 1342 Kettering Road. And I'm here representing the Mundelein High School, Our Voice, not the high school, but MHS, Our Voice, Our Choice. I want to be clear, it's totally separate. But first and foremost, thank you for your commitment to hybrid. And I'm not here to challenge that. And you've been doing a lot of work going behind the scenes. And we look forward to when it gets implemented. A lot of challenges going forward. I understand. We all understand that. So, and we love this high school. We love the teachers, and really, it's just quickly about the virtual learning. And we know we're going to be in that for a while. We anticipate that after tonight. And so, our question is, how can we make education virtually better? And I'm sure everyone's trying to figure that out. And how do we do that? And so, some of the things that we're hearing from the parents and groups and experiences, shortened class periods, 15 minutes when it's supposed to go 75 minutes, people in the background, boyfriends, girlfriends, kids on laps, students not using screens. It's a team effort, no doubt about it. And so we're asking what policies, what can we do to ensure the quality? And so some ideas, are there some Zoom monitors, or how can we get to full class periods, and how can we have the teachers teaching the full time and not just leaving the screen up, and can we bring teachers into the buildings to teach, and can that be a requirement, and students participation with the screen on, boost grades or something like that to keep it going so they don't lose interest, knowing we're going to be into something for a long time and we're anticipating that. So I don't know what that's, there's a lot that goes on there with policies, procedures. But we're seeing some things and we're just concerned. We're still concerned for the students. And so that at some point in time could just be talked about, that wherever, whenever, that would help us. And that we can, hopefully the administration and board can pivot quickly when the metrics are reasonable, whenever that is, and that to go to hybrid. And we just appreciate the board responding, and the administration and Dr. Myers always responding to emails, and it is a thank you. We know you're going through a lot, and the administration, everyone's working hard. And so how we just make our education better, knowing the situation we're heading in. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the consent.
Do we need to ask for online?
Oh, is there anyone online? I'm sorry, I'm not used to that. All right, let it be noted that if anyone out there wants to ask a question or make a statement, now's your moment.
Still no.
Okay, so there is no remote people who would like to make any comments, so we will be moving on to the consent agenda. Does anyone have any questions on the consent agenda? Okay, so we need one motion for the consent agenda items. I have a motion to approve. So moved.
Second.
Was that Davalos?
Yeah.
Rastrelli, second.
Thank you. Rastrelli,
Yes.
Wellington,
Yes.
Yaffe, yes. Vote. Wimet.
Okay, so now Did anyone have any questions that they needed answered up on the Monday call, or anything that you didn't get a chance to talk through?
The only thing I have is the memorandum of understanding with the, that we went through when they do, I think it's gonna get explained, but when they do, if they can talk about the process on evaluation.
Okay, all right, so we will, when that presentation comes up, we can go more in depth on that. Okay, so now we need the District 120 report from the business office.
Donna, do we have the presentation? All right. As you can see, this is property tax levy time of the year. I'll just say right off the bat, tonight you won't be approving the property tax levy. This is just a preliminary where we look at the estimates. You've got the report in your board packet. Just so I'll run through the legal requirements that we have to do as a school district and as a board. So tonight we do the estimated levy. You see what that is. You approve the estimated levy, so that allows me to then advertise for a truth and taxation hearing. That has to be done within a week to 14 days before the next school board meeting. That is, it has to be published in a newspaper. And then we have a truth and taxation hearing, which will happen at the next board meeting in December. And then at that point, it'll be on the agenda for you to approve the final tax levy. So tonight, we're just going to go through some information. We'll talk about the tax cap and just some of the pieces that are involved with the tax levy and some comparative data to some of the other high school districts in the county, because I think that's very instructive to get some perspective. Just real quickly, we'll go through the levy process. It is done once per year, right, which we're doing right now. The estimated amount is what I just explained, what we're doing now in November, and the hearing and a final approval in December. But we won't know the real EAV, and that's the equalized assessed valuation, or the tax rate until April. Now, I do get preliminary numbers, and in that report that you got in your packet, those are preliminary numbers that we get from the county clerk's office, or the tax assessment office. And those are usually very close and to what actually happens, but it's not, we don't know that for absolute sure until spring. And that's always, one of the weird things with tax levies. We approve them now before we even have our budget for next year, because these are revenues that will go into next year's budget. But that's just the nature of the beast, and that's how it's done in Illinois. So next slide, please. This is just a quick snapshot of some of the highlights, I guess you could say, of the levy. The existing equalized assessed valuation increase is only 1.4%, which is very low. And I talked to the Fremont Township assessor, and we've talked through it. It's just the nature of what this year ended up for our whole taxing district. Last few years, we've been more in the 4, 5, 6% range, so that's pretty low. And that's not with new property. That's just your existing property that you have in the district. So it's very low, but that's what it is. I did ask him about the Medline property that's up on Peterson Road. That is not included in this year. He said that'll come on next year, and that'll give us a big boost next year, which will be nice. So that next piece, new property, is only 3.5 million. Again, that's historically low. For the records that I have going back almost 20 years, that's half of our previous low. Our previous low was a little over 6 million. So that was another record type of low year, and that's usually not a good sign either. Again, talking to the Fremont Township assessor, he said this was just a low year. He didn't know if it was because of the pandemic or just the the economy. There's just a low year in terms of new property in the district. The tax rate will increase very minimally, just a little under 2 cents. It's a very small increase. The tax rate, though, overall, if you throw in this year's levy or estimated,
it will have dropped 32 cents since its peak in 2014. And we'll get into those dynamics here in another slide here in just a second. But really, that's about a 12% reduction in tax rate over the last 6 years, which is nice. But that's what the tax cap does, and we'll get into that here in just a minute. The overall levy increase is going to be about 2.3%, a little bit higher than that. That tracks almost perfectly with CPI, which is what the tax cap is meant to do. It's either the greater of CPI or 5%, whichever is less. CPI for this calculation is 2.3%. That's what our levy is going up this year. That doesn't always happen, but because we're extremely low in terms of our EAV increase and our new property, it's going to track really close to CPI, which is what it did. So the total dollar increase is about $844,000 that we're estimating for next year. And what that means to your average homeowner of a home that's about $300,000 in fair market value, it's about $52 annually. So if I'm a salesman like those late night cable TV shows, that's about $4.30 a month. You probably can't even get a Starbucks for that. So that's the increase to your $300,000 homeowner for this next year. The average increase is pretty much what it is this year. Over the last 10 years, it's been about 2.3% a year. It's had some fluctuations. We've had a couple of really low years, as I have down there. 2015 and 16 were historically very low years. But we had some higher years. So you mix it all in, and it's about a 2.3 average increase for the last 10 years. We move to the next slide. Again, also, if you guys have any questions, stop me and we'll talk about it. I do want to spend a little time on the tax cap law because I think that's an important thing for people to understand. And as you talk to your neighbors about property taxes, everyone says your property taxes are too high. And in Illinois, we're one of the worst states in the country for property taxes. If you look, whatever study you may look at, we're probably 49th or 50th, any one of them you look at in terms of the worst in the country. And before the tax cap started, property taxes were extremely high in Illinois then. Then they put a cap on it back in 1991 because they were so out of control. You know, we look at 2.3 average increases over the last 10 years. They were looking at double-digit increases every year because properties were growing so rapidly back in the 70s and 80s. So they went to the legislature and put in this tax cap law, which is called PTEL, the Property Tax Extension Limitation Law. So if I say PTEL and throw that little acronym in there, you'll know what it means. It's a tax cap law. But that's been in place since 1991. So it's almost 30 years of that being in place. And it's done what it's supposed to do. It's kept property taxes at a relatively low amount in terms of increases. But they started at a high spot to begin with, and then we get those little incremental increases every year. That adds up over time. We still have high property taxes. I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying that there is law in place that limits it. Now, the caveat to that is all they did was limit it. They didn't fix the education funding system. So the system that we have is from the state, and that's the property tax law. All it does is limit it how much we can ask for every year. That's all it does. It doesn't fundamentally change how schools are financed. I just want to make that point. If you look at the graph here, what it does is it shows the inverse relationship between your property tax rate, which is the red line, and the blue bars are your equalized assessed valuation. So as you can see, as your equalized assessed valuation goes up, the tax cap generally works to reduce the rate over time, usually very small amounts. Now, there was one big dip back in about 2005. That's when the district paid off a whole bunch of debt. So that had nothing to do with the property tax cap. That was just the district paying off debt and not reissuing more. So there's a big drop that year. But then as you see the EAVs falling after the Great Recession, and there was a huge effect on the property values. As we all know, if anyone's lived here a while, our property values probably haven't even come back to what they were 10 years ago. You can see it precipitously dropping off in terms of our values, but then that tax rate goes up. Because what the tax cap law says is they don't care what the EAV is. All it tax cap says is you can get 2% more than last year, or 2.5% more than last year, 1.5% more than last year. And then they just back into that tax rate. So you get more each year, that tax rate's got to go up if the EAV goes down. It's just simple math. So what happened again when our values started recovering there in the last 4 or 5 years, then that tax rate started gradually coming back down. And that's what I said it's been doing for the last 5 years, 6 years. It's come down about 12%. That's what the tax cap does for you. It's not so great. It wasn't made to work in an economy where property values are going down. I don't think the people that made that law even thought of that. But that's what happened, and that's happened all over the state of Illinois. What's the last thing I wanted to say there? Yes, yeah. So we talked about that inverse relationship of rate to EAV, and that's something we'll get into just in a minute later when I look at what I think is on the horizon. So let's move to the next slide. This is where we compare all of our local high school districts only in Lake County. It's not fair to compare to unit districts or elementary districts because they're all different animals. We're just comparing apples to apples here. These are your high school districts in Lake County. So basically the two metrics I'm looking at here, nothing to do with COVID. These are property tax metrics. A new metric that came out about 3 years ago was what Illinois came out with, evidence-based funding, was adequacy of funding for education. And so what it shows there, it gives each district a percentage of adequacy. So what the state is saying, and that's why it's called evidence-based. They look at 50 different variables of what they think a school should be spending to do excellent education. And if you met that metric and those things perfectly according to the state of Illinois, you'd be at 100% of adequacy, right there. And we're relatively close. Mundelein High School's at about 90%. We're still a little bit below adequacy according to the state of Illinois, but pretty close. We're right there in the middle. But our friends to the east and the south of us, they have much greater property tax and property wealth than we do. So they're able to generate a lot more dollars in revenue for their school districts with typically lower tax rates in order to do that. The one that's the biggest anomaly there is Lake Forest. But again, even compared to Highland Park or Stevenson or Libertyville, they have twice the EAV per pupil. They have over $2 million per pupil in EAV. The next closest to them is Highland Park at 1.3 million, and Mundelein High School is about 770,000 per student at EAV. So that gives you an idea of the range in Lake County. It's a huge range. And Zion Benton over here on the far right is only at like $327,000 per student in EAV. So that kind of tells you the huge range that we have in Lake County. It's kind of a microcosm of the country and why Illinois is so messed up in terms of their funding for schools. So you have a huge disparity. So you've got 4 districts on the left there that are very, have high property value and have high adequacy. So they're up at like, Highland Park is at about 177% of adequacy. And the others are right around 160, 165. Stevenson is just a little bit below 160. I think they're about 158. And then there's this big drop off down to Mundelein at like 90. But what I want to show to you, and I've talked about this before in previous levy presentations, is Mundelein High School. That red line is our operating tax rate. What you see generally here, a trend line is from the richest districts from property wealth standpoint to the districts that have the least property wealth. So the trend line is basically like this. Property taxes rate to property wealth. And where the anomalies are is us here, Warren and Grant. I can't say what they do with their tax dollars. I can say that their adequacy is much lower. It's about 30% lower than ours. But let's compare, and I won't get into that. Let's compare just some of our closest neighbors here. Stevenson and Libertyville, which Mundelein does get compared to quite a bit. Their tax rates are both higher than ours, even though their property tax EAV per student is way higher than ours. Stevenson's is about $1 million. Well, both of them, Libertyville and Stevenson, are about $1 million per pupil in EAV, whereas ours, again, is about $770,000. But our tax rate is lower. Ours is about 25 cents lower than Libertyville and about 50 cents lower than Stevenson. So I did a little calculation and said, if we charge the same operating tax rate as Libertyville, you guys hazard a guess at how much more tax revenue we'd get? 3.7 million more, just if we raised our tax rate 25 cents. We raised it 50 cents like what they charge in Stevenson, we'd get almost double that, about 7.1 million. And I can tell you, if we got that kind of money, our adequacy would be up here somewhere. I'm not making any value statements. My point here is what I'm saying is that Mundelein has a pretty relatively low tax rate given our EAV and what our neighbors are charging. So that's just Mundelein High School. I can't speak for other taxing districts, but that's what you want to compare it to. I think we're doing pretty well, and I think we deliver a pretty nice product for the amount of revenue that we generate. So that's that. Next one. What's on the horizon? There's a lot of stuff going on, obviously, as you've been watching the news with the election. It wasn't just about Trump and Biden this year. It was the Fair Tax Amendment for Illinois. That was a huge thing for school finance in Illinois. And we have no idea what that's going to end up looking like. As I mentioned before, I think EAV will continue to increase at a pretty slow pace. Who knows what's going to, that'll depend on the economy. Nobody will know for sure what's going to end up, how the effect of the recession will be on the housing market. It hasn't had a huge effect yet, but who knows what that's going to look like going forward. I think we'll still see, because CPI, I think, will still stay relatively modest. It's been pretty consistent for many, many years, probably still in that 2% range for many years to come, unless something really crazy happens in the economy. The biggest question there is cuts to state funding. As I mentioned before, you saw in the news, Pritzker said, well, my fair tax didn't pass. That's going to mean budget cuts for everybody. Now, that was just a broad statement that he made. We have no idea what that may look like and how that will affect education. I'll just say this, in the past, within the last recession, higher ed got whacked the most in education funding in Illinois. Anybody who sends their kid to U of I or any of the other state schools have seen massive increases in tuition over the last 10, 15 years. That's where they've made a lot of cuts to the education budget in Illinois. I think, this is my opinion, they've pretty much cut that one to the bone as much as they can. There may be still called general state aid, which is now evidence-based funding. They prorated it across the board, like they would give everybody like an 8% cut. That's not going to happen anymore. Under EBF, what they're going to do is they're going to go after different tiered schools. They've got all the schools in Illinois tiered according to that adequacy that we just saw in the last slide. So we're still up in there amongst what they consider the higher tiered schools. Your Stevensons, Libertyvilles, Lake Forest, Highland Park, they're in tier 4. That's the highest tier for funding, and you get the least amount of state aid in that tier. Mundelein's in tier 3. So what they're going to do is they're going to whack everybody in tier 4. I think they'll pretty much cut them and say, you don't get anything from the state. Then they'll come to us next. If they don't get enough from that, then they'll come to the people in the tier 3 and cut us. Then they go down to tier 2 and 1, and the the tier one schools are the ones that have the least amount of property tax wealth in Illinois. They probably won't get touched in this first round of cuts. We might. They might be able to get what they need from the tier four schools. I don't know. They've also cut transportation funding in the past. That's one of their favorites because people don't think about that. They don't say, oh, you're cutting my bus for my kid. Nobody thinks about that. They think about if somebody lays off a teacher or something like that, then they'll get upset. They don't care about bus drivers. Sorry to bus drivers out there. But that's what the state of Illinois has basically said in the past. I would expect that's where more cuts might happen. The most drastic thing that really gets bad though is the possibility, and I talked about this last year, when we were talking about the budget, if things don't come through for the state of Illinois, they might talk about a pension cost shift, which would mean Illinois, right now, they pretty much cover the pensions. We don't have to pay any money in as a school district. All of our certified staff have to have money. It's like, you take it like Social Security. If you have a private sector job, your employer puts in 7.5% and you get 7.5% taken out of your check. In Illinois, it would be you get 9.4% taken out of your check and sent to Illinois, and the state of Illinois covers that other portion, which your employer normally would do for Social Security. That's what they're saying they'd shift back onto the employer. So if it were the Social Security example, they might say, instead of you picking up 7.5%, you're now going to pick up 10%. So they just increase it. So in other words, it'd be a cut to our budget. They wouldn't have to pay out more, but they'd shift all that cost on the local school districts and we would have to pay it. What that ends up looking at, like, who knows? Again, those are the sorts of things that we might see coming out of Springfield this year, and if not this year, maybe next year. I do expect, though, that I think we'll see more federal funding coming this year. It seems like what's been said in Washington, there seems to be some agreement between both parties that there could be a stimulus package that could come forth. What that might look like, how much we might end up getting from that, that's anyone's guess at this point. They're pretty far apart on dollars, but I think they'll come to some agreement. Just don't know what that's going to look like at that point. And that maybe is probably will only be like a 1-year deal. So we'll see what happens. I do want to say this also, if you watch the news or if you've read letters to the editor in the Chicago Tribune, they'll say stuff like, oh, because the fair tax didn't pass, property taxes are going to increase. It doesn't happen. Like I mentioned before, we're on a property tax cap. If the state cuts $1 million, let's just say from their budget, what they sent to us, I can't come to you and say, let's raise the levy another $1 million to cover that. Nope, we can't do that. It's impossible. We can get 2.3%. That's it, period. I can't come back to you and say, because the state is not giving us money, then we need to raise our levy. That doesn't happen. Next slide real quick. But what will happen is that these are the percentages of sources of funding for this year's budget for 2021. These, it seems like we dropped off a couple of percentages here, but pull it back up. This is property taxes here, about 83%. This little green slice here is about 9%. That is state funding. This is federal funding. It's about 4%. That slice may get a little bit bigger proportion of the total revenue. This slice will get a little bit smaller. This slice will get a little bit bigger. But the total pie isn't getting any bigger. The slices will just change in size. That's what will happen. Not an increase anymore in property taxes, just a difference in how it's proportionately distributed, the total amount of revenue. Hope that makes sense. So that's it for my presentation. I don't know if you have any questions. I could go in for hours and talk about all of the statistics that go with the property taxes, but if you have any questions, I'm open to that right now. All right.
Everyone good?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the next one is the superintendent's office.
So first was Pardon? First up, we're gonna have an update on basketball, with what's going on with IHSA and Illinois State Board of Education.
All right, everybody who's doing presentations now, Troy, if we can speak up just to make sure anyone in the audience can hear, because I know with our masks on, it's a little bit of a challenge. So I'm just a little reminder so that the audience can hear what is happening.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you letting me come here tonight to give you some information and an update on basketball. The one thing that I'd like to share that, the past 8.5 months or 9 months, it's been difficult for everybody. It's not, I would say in my entire career in education, it's been probably the most trying time. And I usually say that I have the greatest job in the world. I get to talk about student activities and all the fun stuff that kids get to do. It hasn't been that way for the last, 8.5 months. What I want to try to do here is give you just the background of information on what's been going on with basketball. That's been a very hot topic of discussion, not just with athletic directors, but in the community. With us having a boys basketball program that, they had their year cut short last year. It has even increased the discussion with people coming to me in the community. So I'm going to try to give you as concise of an update as I can. Basically, we were moving forward at the start of August. The IHSA revamped all of the athletic seasons and moved us from 3 seasons to 4, fall, winter, spring, and summer. Sports got moved out of the fall and moved to the spring. Some got shifted to the summer. Well, we were planning up until October 27th to start our winter sports on November 16th. And our plan was to go from November 16th through February 13th. I do want to share that, our coaching staff and with our fall sports and all of the contact days that we did do, we feel that we can safely conduct contact days in the North Suburban Conference and for our student athletes at the Mundelein High School. We followed the CDC guidelines, Illinois Department of Public Health guidelines, Lake County Health Department guidelines, and we were able to get through the fall sports and the contact days. I didn't list everything up there, but I listed a lot of what our students did. And we feel that we provided a valuable service to our kids during these contact days. Well, when we're planning to start those winter sports, scheduling and everything else got ripped up, and we're trying to put things together. On November 27th or October 27th, our Illinois Department of Public Health notified the IHSA 15 minutes before the governor was going to go on and make a presentation to the entire state of Illinois. The IHSA sent out an email saying that Illinois Department of Public Health moved basketball from a medium risk sport to a high risk sport. So then we did not have much time as athletic directors across the state to digest that, but that created a lot of discussion on the October 27th. The next day on October 28th, the IHSA had a board of directors meeting previously scheduled. What came out of that meeting was a surprise to us as athletic directors, but the board of directors voted on the 28th that they were going to continue forward with us trying to play the sport of basketball across the state. And, I'll share, when I walked out of the office that day, I was walking on water. It's the first time in 8.5 months where I was personally truly excited for our students, our girls and our boys basketball players. The Illinois Department of Public Health and the ISBE then sent a letter to Dr. Myers. There was correspondence was shared out where they do not recommend that schools go against what IDPH recommendations are. So that puts schools like Mundelein High School and the athletic department in a precarious position. Do we follow the IHSA leadership and go forward and play, which I want to do as an athletic director, or do we follow ISBE and IDPH guidelines? I just want to give the board an update that we meet. I've been in more Zoom meetings in the last 8 months than, hours. I've been in 8, 9, 10 hours a day sometimes. The North Suburban Conference athletic directors, we meet all of the time. When it's non-pandemic, it's usually once a month for about 3 hours. I'll bet we're meeting 20+ hours easily a month, just as a conference. Then as a state association, we have over 800 schools. The state ADs meet together every Monday and we get an update from the IHSA. So we do that every Monday. And then the NSC, oh, hold on, I lost my place here. Okay. At last week's IHSA IADA meeting, which is every Monday, there was a survey that was conducted. And Craig Anderson was in the meeting. And they asked the question, how many schools were planning to conduct and participate in basketball? 9% of the schools shared that they would move forward to play basketball. 29% of the schools shared in that meeting that they were not going to move forward to play basketball. And 62% of those schools shared that they had made no decision yet. This was last Monday. There was actually another meeting yesterday that I had my assistant sit in on for me. We were here at the district office. They again did a survey and they asked who was starting with basketball. Yesterday, in 1 week, it changed. 38% of the schools that were in the meeting stated that they were not going to start with basketball at all. 50% of the schools that were in that meeting shared that they were going to start with non-contact practice only, which is the guidelines that are laid out in the all sports policy, which I'll talk about in a minute. But 50% of the schools said that they were not going to basically play games. They were going to follow what IDPH had in their all sports policy. 6% of the schools shared that they would do the non-contact practices, but they were planning to start play on November 30th, which is when we can start playing games. And then lastly, 7% were going to go full go. So 7% in the state, full practice starting November 16th, and then they were planning to play games. So right now we're at 13% of the schools are saying that they're going to play games. 50% were going to do practices but no games, and then 38% are not playing at all. I do want to share, that CPS has announced that they're going to follow the governor's guidance and guidelines. They did announce, and there was an article in the Tribune or the Sun Times that they were not going to play. And I want to tell you, just to give you some context, our basketball schedule was changing greatly this year with our boys program specifically. We were going to be in multiple shootouts where we were going to go into different parts of the state. And then we were also going to be playing some of the top schools in the suburban and the city area. And we were scheduled to go back down to Collinsville for the holiday tournament again. So our boys' schedule was not, last year it ramped up a little bit, and this year it was going to be really ramped up. So it was going to be very different. The pandemic has changed the way that we're thinking. And, I'm worried that if we choose to play, that we're not going to be able to have anybody to play. I want to share that, we're restricted to the COVID-9 region. The COVID-9 region is Lake County and McHenry County. Those are the schools that we're supposed to play. I reached out to the IHSA and I told them that we were having difficulty getting some schools to play. Most schools were telling us in boys basketball they did not want to play us. So the IHSA granted us a 15-mile radius outside of this outside of our COVID region. So we started calling schools like Palatine Fremd, Elgin Larkin, Conant. We had contracts in place and we were ready. We're in position to play them. I got phone calls from athletic directors at Fremd and Larkin where they told me that their district is not going to allow them to play outside of their COVID region. So even if we wanted to play against Palatine Fremd, who I believe we played in the regional championship last year, their coach is a great coach, great program. We're not even going to be able to play under these current guidelines. Their district won't allow them to play outside of the COVID region. I want to share that we did survey our basketball team at the request of a few people. What came out of the boys basketball survey, 30 kids responded to Coach Badgley's requests. The kids voted 30-0, expressing that they want to play. They want to play. The 84% of the student athletes responded that they would love to play now in the winter season. 11.5 of them said that they want to play in the spring. They'd prefer to have it moved with all the guidelines and protocols that are in place right now. And then 100% of them shared that if there's the possibility of playing a postseason state tournament, which right now the IHSA is not focusing on any type of state championship, if we are allowed to play in a state tournament and the IHSA comes out and says that it's going to be able to happen in the spring, 100% of the kids said that they would love to have it moved to the spring. And I want to share this out of yesterday's meeting that the board of directors, out of yesterday's IADA meeting with the athletic directors and the IHSA, it was mentioned that the board of directors are going to have a virtual meeting tomorrow because we are getting to almost the point of no return. A decision has to be made with basketball. The board of directors are having a virtual meeting, and then Craig Anderson, the IHSA executive director, did not specifically state this, but we're inferring from his comments that there will be a decision coming tomorrow with the position that the IHSA is going to have. If only 13% of the schools are going to play basketball, they may have to look at moving basketball to January, February, or to the spring or the summer. And they did move wrestling recently at that board of directors meeting. They moved it from the winter season all the way to the summer because it is the highest risk sport. And then the last piece that I want to share with you, we hope that the IHSA and IDPH get on the same page in communicating. I can't promise that that's going to happen tomorrow. That's my hope. I feel bad that our kids are in this position. The pandemic has made this whole situation unfortunate. But I'm advocating for our kids. I'm just trying to give you as a school board as much information that I can. So, you guys can, make informed decisions or have informed discussions out there. Are there any questions that anybody has?
Have you heard anything about IHSA and IDPH having any communication with each other yet?
The only thing that I know is what we get shared, Peter, in our weekly meetings with the IHSA and the IADA. And from what our executive director has shared, that he's reached out multiple times, and he deals a lot with the Lieutenant Governor Ruiz, I believe is the name. And the communication going back and forth is not, it doesn't function very well. The IHSA is indicating they're not getting a lot of answers. And we can go all the way back to when we tried to start summer camps in July. There were some changes that were made at the 11th hour, and we're getting it from the IHSA, and they're telling us they're not getting it timely from IDPH.
So communication is a great example that our state's giving us right now. That's fantastic.
If the governor makes any type of blanket statement, that would trump everything else though, right? That would kind of nullify whatever.
I know that the Illinois Department of Public Health is, I believe, an extension of, we're the governor of our state. And when that communication came down on October 27th, the IHSA was given 15 minutes to get it out to us that basketball was going from medium to high risk. And what the board of directors, with the IHSA, it's really principals and elected people from schools from all around the state that sit on that board of directors group. I don't want to speak for them. They voted for us to move forward against the recommendation that came from IDPH and the governor's office. But what our legal counsel is advising us is that we should follow the recommendation of ISBE and IDPH.
You anticipate there will be a final decision made tomorrow?
I'm hoping, but what I have learned in the last 8.5 months, I cannot say that we will find out tomorrow. And I do want to share that both of our basketball coaches shared with me that so the all sports policy that I mentioned that's in place, that says that high risk sports can't practice, can't scrimmage, can't do anything drill wise against one another other than wear a mask, go in and do exercises and shoot free throws and and do some things on their own. The basketball coaches shared that if we're in that 50 percentile of practicing and not being able to play a game and not really even having true basketball practice, they would prefer to hold off. And we're hoping at the beginning of this whole pandemic, the IHSA came out and said 30 of all the programs that every school has, their goal is to get everybody an opportunity to participate. And that's their goal. So I'm trusting that they're going to give us an opportunity to participate. I worry as an athletic director, it's just going to all pile up and we're going to have 25 sports going and we're going to, be worrying about facilities and 2 sport athletes and multiple coaches. Our head water polo coach is a football coach and both those seasons now are in the same season. So we as adults will work through that. I hope that we can give our kids an opportunity, but I can't promise that we're going to find out tomorrow.
Well, I think obviously everyone wants to know as soon as you know, we want to know. Is there any more questions for me?
Troy, just from a logistical standpoint, I don't know how much you get a chance to think about this, but if and when things start to pile up, because inevitably that's going to happen, what are you going to be looking for from us and for the district to help facilitate finding places for these kids to participate? Because that's clearly going to be a challenge.
It'll be a networking thing that we have to, work through right now. I mean, your ties to Stevenson High School, or, if people have in our baseball program, Trey Benjamin, his dad has a baseball facility. Those kinds of contacts we're going to have to work through. Right now, our hands have been tied because we've utilized the Libertyville Sports Complex a lot, and we've also utilized Santa Maria, and neither one of those places, we don't have the ability to use those places right now. So it's a concern of mine, but I hope that we get there and we're allowed to play. I don't want to go through what we've been going through. Last spring, the kids lost it. It's only, you get to do this one time and you lose all that. And it kills me that we're sitting in this position.
Have there been, I know the answer to this question, have there been considerations about what these student athletes will do to go play basketball elsewhere? That the likelihood of continuing to play and hone their craft is likely to happen, that they're probably going to get on AAU programs and travel programs, and they're going to go across the state and they're going to play 35, 45 minutes away, and then they're going to come back into their homes anyway?
Yes, Peter, I've spent hours talking about exactly what you're talking about with other athletic directors, and we've been sharing that through our leadership to the IHSA, and I know that they're trying to share that with the Illinois Department of Public Health. But I have I can share with you, offline here, just a situation where another athletic director talked to me about somebody that made a decision at IDPH regarding cross country, and a high profile cross country parent called down there and asked some questions. And it was somebody that answered the phone that gave them just an unbelievable response, that people aren't thinking about the A, B, C, and D, because these kids truly are traveling on the weekends and playing AAU and travel. What I can tell you is the IHSA did hear that, and they did put in the provision that starting this year, if your season was moved, like girls volleyball got moved from the fall to the spring, that girls will be allowed to both play with their school and on their club or travel team. That used to be not able to happen. Baseball will also be able to do that, but because they were moved from spring to summer, but that's going to really hinder, because we're going to be still dealing with pitch counts, and that's going to make things very tough. But that exactly what you say, we have expressed that.
I think to Peter's point, you're trying to express that the players may be better off playing at their high schools as opposed to going in the traveling team.
Yep. Yes.
Traveling about.
Absolutely.
Yes, and we
A letter was
absolutely,
issued to the governor saying that from a bunch of superintendents and athletic directors too.
and that we 100% talked about it, and we've tried to push that way to let them know they're safer. And that's what I said at the very beginning of this. What we did in August, September, and October here, we have the data that shows that our kids did it well. We had a couple cases where we had to do some contact tracing, and we did have to hold a small group of kids out, but we did it safely and did it well. And we're not being asked for that data at the state level. We have the data.
All right, well, thank you, Troy, for all your efforts in keeping our student athletes
And I,
at the forefront. I know it's a challenging time, but we just have to keep working through it one day at a time and
and please,
see where it takes us.
I want our kids to play. I want our boys and girls to be able to play. That's my stance, and I'm afraid that we won't have anybody to play.
All right, thank you.
Troy.
Thank you.
Up next, we will go over the follow-up from last meeting on the hybrid schedule. Mike Pope will be delivering that part. This is a follow-up to looking at what a two-group model would look like being A and PIA. And then we'll get into next steps.
Same thing, Mike, if you can talk nice and loud. so
I will
everybody
do
else in
my
the audience
best.
can hear us.
I gotta stay behind this line because
Yeah.
I'm too tall. Okay, as Dr. Meyer said, I'm here to talk to you tonight. At the last meeting, a month ago, but it feels like it's a lot longer than that. I was here showing you our hybrid model. Now, before we get to the question, you guys did ask to come back and see what it would look like if we went to AM and PM. Before showing you that though, I do want to update you on some of the changes that have taken place based on the number of students that chose hybrid and things like that. So Ms. Ortiz, if you go to the next slide. All right, so last month when I presented the hybrid schedule, remember we were assuming, because we had to make some assumptions at that point, of how many kids would choose hybrid, right? So I presented 4 groups of students in a hybrid model. Since that time, 70% of our students did not choose hybrid, 54% of our students chose hybrid, okay? Also, we had a conservative limit on our classrooms of 10 per room. Since then, our facilities team has went through every single room and measured out every single room as see how many desks we could fit in all the rooms and how many people could fit, making sure we do not cross the 6 feet barrier. That's still the same. We would not have students sitting within 6 feet. And yeah, a lot of our rooms are 10. I would say that most of them are 10, but we have some that are 11, some that are 12, some that are 13, up to 15. Like for example, our C, the basement of the A hallway is much smaller in general than the C hallway, right? The C wing, the new classrooms, they're bigger. So instead of setting them all at 10, they've now all been set at individual numbers to help accommodate more students each period. Mr. Lerner and I, who I can see here on the screen, he did much more of this than I did because he's much better at Excel than I am. But we worked through the best way to split the students. The best way to ending up to split the students was by bus route and transportation where you live. But I want to make sure, again, I think I said this last time, like my daughter's school district, for example, they did the same thing and they split it on Washington Street up in Gurnee, north of Washington South. We did not do that. We wanted to make sure that each group had a nice representation of kids from this side. So we didn't go a north-south split or an east-west. We kind of pick and chose from every area, okay? To have a nice representation of our whole district in both groups. Another advantage, I think I said this last time as well, of doing it that way and not by an alpha split is we do have students that have different last names. They live in the same house, they're brothers and sisters. Doing it this way at least ensures that the kids you live with in your own home, you would be going to school with in the same groups, okay? And most likely your neighbors if you vibe with them. So what this did allow us was to go down to 2 groups of students. So originally, I showed you 4, the numbers came in, we will be able to pull off 2 groups of students, okay? And I want to separate this. The number of groups is totally independent from what schedule we're doing. This is why I wanted to make sure I presented it this way tonight. There's not more groups in one schedule and less groups in another, totally independent of one another. The groups of students is just dependent on which kids and how many kids choose hybrid. Okay, the schedule is totally independent of that. Since the last time, and I did say it at the time, we probably have to shift the time a little bit to make sure that, which would D75 and transportation and shared costs. Since that time, the time has shifted a little bit, but it's moved a little bit later. We start a little bit later, get out a little bit later. And again, now I do want to point out something about 2 groups, and this is true of either schedule. So by having 2 groups, if you think this through, we were planning on about 75% of our students. If we were guessing at 75, splitting those into 4, which equaled about 350 students a day. By having 54% of the students and splitting them in two, we're about 550 students a day. So we have about 200 more kids in the building than what we were planning for in the last update last month. Now, which is great. More kids can come to school every day. That's a good thing. Now, there are some other things to consider with that that you may not think through, that they don't seem like they're connected in any way, but they are. So I just want to give you an example. So you see lower threshold of teachers out sick. So what that means is when we return to the building, our teachers have supervisions, right? They teach classes, they have prep time, they have lunch, and they have a supervision period. So in a hybrid, our two main supervisions would be study halls. Okay, so you have to have someone sitting in front of the students, but study halls also now include lunch periods and free periods, because those kids may not leave the building, but they can't just be in the hallway. They can't be in the cafeteria like they used to be, right? So we'd have more teachers assigned to that. Another supervision that would be new this year with all this taking place is helping account for teachers that aren't there that day, whether their son or daughter or whoever at home is sick, or that someone's been quarantined at home, or they're showing symptoms, or whatever the case, they need to stay home, but they can still teach. That's fine. That's great that they're home and they're able to teach, but then someone has to watch the kids that are at the building that are supposed to be in their class, right? So if I'm homesick or my daughter's sick, but I can teach, and I teach in A105, and Aaron's in my class, someone has to watch Aaron, right? Someone has to supervise, especially Aaron, right? So
a certified teacher.
yeah, so that's what we're working for. So we already know the sub allowance is way down. We're having a really hard time with subs right now, which is understandable. But that's a new supervision. We've worked it through with the union. I talked to Mr. Petros about it, had a lot of conversations, but it would be similar to a study hall. You're not teaching, right? You're just in the room supervising like a study hall while the teacher at home is teaching. So the more students you have in a building every day, the more of the first supervision I mentioned, we need more of those, which means we have less of these, right? So I just want to make sure the more students we get in the building, which is a good thing, will lower the amount of teachers on a given day, that if too many teachers call in sick, we got to stay remote that day. I don't have the exact number yet, because I'm going to play that all the way through. And that would be like one of the last things I'll know once we're all the way through the end, but it would be less. And then the one more thing is more movement. So what me and Mr. Lerner were really working through was, so let me give you an example, like second period. Second period has the most classes that are over the number of students allowed in the room they were originally scheduled to be in, right? So I'm supposed to be in A105. We have 13 kids that are here on a Monday, based on the global split, but you can only fit 10 kids in the room. We're gonna have to move the room, right? You can tweak kid schedules too, but we're either gonna have to move some kid schedules or most likely we're gonna have to switch classrooms. Because we don't have a lot of classrooms that can fit 14. We do have some, and we have enough. But we will have some classes that are supposed to be in A101. Sorry, Mr. Petros, picked your room, but it may have to be in C103, right? So there will be some more movement in the building to accommodate those two groups. Just want to make sure that was known. Okay, so I'm going to start with it's weird to say the old schedule. It's a month old, right? So the current schedule, the planned hybrid schedule, I'm struggling what to call it. It's not that old. So you've seen this, but it looked very similar to this. But before we had 4 groups. Right now there's a red group. So anytime you see something in red, that's the red group at school. And if the red group's at school, the gray group is at home, still doing learning, concurrent teaching, right? And then there's one over here. Friday's right here. It looks just like Tuesday, but it's gray. So the gray students over here. So you would come back-to-back days. You would get all 8 periods. And then the rest of the week, you'd be at home getting all 8 periods. So this would allow all of our students, if you remember previously with 4 groups, every student got they were there twice in person every 2 weeks, but they only had every class once every 2 weeks. You have every class once a week. You do get to come to school twice for 4 periods each time. Okay. So that nothing really has changed much with that, other than the groups going from 2 to 4 and a little bit of the time. Now, I want to compare that, because this is what you asked me to do, of what it would look like in a AM PM split. So Ms. Ortiz, you go to the AM PM. All right, so working through an AM PM split, same idea. If you're if you're a student in the red group, this is when you would be at school. In here. Okay, so I get periods 1, 2, 3, 4 at school on Monday and Tuesday. If you notice, we kept the odd even days for consistency purposes and for if we have to go in and out of remote and hybrid like the other schedule. So we stuck with odds and evens. And the difference is one group comes in the morning, red, so the gray group's at home. We have a 2-hour break in the middle of the day due to having to get the kids out onto the buses, had to drive them home. Then they have sanitation and cleaning that they have to do on the buses now that they didn't have to do previously. Pick up the gray students, get them to school, and get them checked in, which takes longer than normal as well, because now we have to do temperature checks and things like that. So I did talk to Lakeside, and we got a pretty good estimate on how long that would need to be in the middle of the day for them to be able to do that. It was about an hour and a half, 2 hours. I went with 2 hours to be conservative. I did at least stuck with the 2 hours. Okay, so really the difference is you're coming to school almost every day. Now, obviously, this yellow day is the all virtual, all remote day, but you're coming to school 4 days a week. But you're just coming for less time. Okay, so the next slide, I tried to break it down and compare the two. Okay, so if you go to the next slide, same thing. So each one of them have 55-minute class periods. And one thing I do want to make sure I point out, the first schedule, the one that I was here for a month ago, has been totally vetted with the union and committees. It's kind of went through the ringer, right? The one I just showed you is me and Anthony made it, right? It hasn't gone through the ringer. We haven't taken it to the committee. It's just an example of what it may look like. Okay. So each one will have a similar length of class period. Both of them same groups. Now, again, I put assuming the same. We will re-ask our students second semester so they have opportunity to change their mind. We did say we would do that when we asked last time. So we will ask if more students want, or if they want to go hybrid to remote or remote to hybrid. These two groups is assuming that it's these kids, right? The same kids. If someone's listening tonight and they say, well, it's two groups maybe, and then more kids pick, then it's probably not two groups anymore, right? It all depends on the number of students choosing hybrid and which students that is. So both of them will have the same number of groups. Both examples has each kid coming to each class once a week. Now you get into the differences. And sorry, you attend class, and you basically go through 8 classes a week in person. The difference is the number of days. So in the one you just saw, you get to go to school 4 days a week. The first one, you go to school 2 days a week. Now the difference is while you're there each day, you only go to 2 classes, whereas in the previous schedule, you go to 4. So either way, you're going to 8 classes a week. Okay. Obviously, one difference is the transportation costs, which Mr. Sherrill will talk about in a second. Obviously, there's additional transportation costs for the AMPM and not for the planned hybrid. And I called it off time, but it's not off. I just wanted to, I put it in quotes. While you're not directly working with a teacher, the original schedule, obviously, most of that is at the end of the day. In the schedule I just showed you, most of it is in the middle of the day because we have to have that transportation time. So there's a very similar amount of that time. It's just placed in different spots. And then one thing I wanted to add, I mean, we've talked about the yellow day. We haven't made any decisions about it, but you know, either schedule, if you really wanted to boost in-person time, you could remove the yellow day or not, but that's the same for either schedule. So if we wanted to do one or not the other, we could still work with that. So a lot of similarities. There's only a few differences. It's just more of the timing of when you're there and how often. Okay, I'll go to the next slide. I think this is the transportation. I could talk about it, but Andy's better at this than I.
When we first talked about this, of course, things have changed even since we came up with this cost estimate. As you know, from the budget cycle, there's a lot of moving variables, but we just had to decide on certain assumptions that we were going to make in order to compare costs. So what we did is we ended up saying, okay, what's a normal cost, daily cost? If there was no COVID, you know, we just had our normal routes, normal day, what does that cost? That'll be our baseline, basically. So that's the $3,116 a day. Obviously, there's no additional cost because that's your baseline. We looked at the AM PM hybrid without sharing any routes with District 75, and then with sharing routes with District 75. I really don't think I don't think that's the non-sharing, that's like totally not sharing any routes whatsoever. If we just couldn't come to any agreement on schedules, that's what it would look like. That's not gonna happen, but we want to put like a worst case scenario up there. So that would be, the 276,000. Now, I will say, even from the time that we came up with this, our original assumption was that we'd start school on January 4th. Well, that's changed too. We're probably looking at more like, January 19th or something like that. So it would actually be less money on any of these options. But in any case, it's just like normal. We're a moving target all the time. We do think that we'll be able to share routes. Mike's been talking with District 75. We're going to do our very best to share as many routes as we can. That said, there's probably going to be, there will be more total routes in a split, because if you think about it, you're doing 2 sets of round trips each day. In a normal day, you're doing 1 round trip a day per route. Does that make sense? You're doing a pickup in the morning at whatever, 6 or 7 in the morning, and you're dropping off at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That's 1 round trip. With a split, you're doing round trips in the morning and you're doing round trips in the afternoon. Now, there are fewer total routes, but when you add them two together, there's actually probably going to be more routes. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but we would have to do more routes just to make sure that we can pick up all the kids in a timely manner. What that's going to look like, again, we still don't know, but we had to make some assumptions. So something along this line is probably more realistic. And it's going to be less than that already, because we know we're not going to have as many. What we assumed on this was January 4th to May 27th, we'd be in the hybrid schedule that whole time with no going back to remote. So that's what that would cost. So that is probably a high number. Well, we know it's a high number now. We're probably going to be doing some pivoting back and forth. Who knows what it'll look like, but we had to make some assumptions as we went along to come up with it. There's other savings that we will have that could offset some of that cost that are already in the budget. The bigger savings now that we're almost halfway through a year, we know we didn't do all those routes that we could have done early in the year. We're still agreeing. We had a good, nice session. We've come up with a contract amendment with Lakeside just today. In principle, we've decided on a structure of how we're going to do that payment. But we will have some savings there, and we also have savings on things like we're not doing the shuttle bus to Carmel. We're not doing the shuttle bus to the tech campus. We're way cut back on activities and athletics. There's a bunch of those savings. Not that they're good savings. We wish we could do all those things, but from a budget standpoint, we are getting those savings, which will help offset some of that cost. So that's what the cost would be with the set of assumptions we had like a week ago, and those change, seems like on a daily basis. But any questions on the costs there?
So the savings aren't reflected in those numbers that you just described, right? Those are some worst case scenarios.
Right.
Okay.
And again, like I said, even with this, we're going to do fewer days than what we assumed in this model. We know we're going to do that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't assume that we go back to remote at some point. This is just saying, well, once we hit hybrids at some point in January, we're going to do hybrid all the way through, whatever the end of the school year ends up being.
And students who drive would still be driving, right?
Thank you.
All right, so I do want to recap a little bit of it because I know it was kind of a lot. I do want to make sure, and I already said this, but the AMPM that I just showed you was, a few of us have seen it. We have not vetted this out. It hasn't gone through committees. A lot of that would change if that was something. We're assuming the same. Again, we're assuming the same students would choose hybrid for semester 2. That's the same. That doesn't matter which schedule, whichever schedule. We're assuming that. If that did not happen, we would maybe have to adjust the number of groups. It's all dependent on how many kids choose hybrid and which kids and which classes they're in. Again, more students which is a good thing, having a, a school with less groups and more opportunity. It does lower that threshold for staff being out sick to where we may have to go remote on a given day if we meet a certain number of staff not being able to come to the building. Again, we'd have to coordinate a more D75 to decide exactly how many routes we could share, and then come up with a little more precise numbers on what that cost would be. And then again, we could still consider a yellow day if we really wanted to increase the amount of time kids are in school. We could look at those yellow days. I know we've had conversations about it, but not to the point where we're ready to eliminate them. But I know we've talked about those yellow days before in some of our building meetings. Okay, I think that's it. Any questions about the hybrid?
Okay, thank you.
Thank
I
you.
know this has been a lot of work with constantly changing schedules.
We're getting a lot of practice at making schedule.
I mean, it's just gonna be a challenging year with the numbers that are coming, so thanks for keeping at it.
You're welcome.
So we're going to continue on with moving forward and looking at the hybrid that we just went through in the one the previous month. Wanted to go back and just kind of revisit where we've been because I think it was a good practice for myself too to reflect. But as you go back through time and you look at what we've been doing since last May, we've brought before the board 6 different models. We've had 2 different occasions where we've brought hybrids to be implemented. One at the beginning of the year, and then one where we have implemented as of October. And unfortunately, because the COVID numbers increased, and you can see that down here, we needed to go on a pause. We had actually set for staff and students to come back in October. I think that's something that we need to keep reminding ourselves. So when people ask, what are we doing? We've been taking those proactive measures. So when asked about what we're doing, I think we can articulate quite well through our timeline here. And you look at where we were in May with the initial 3 different types of programs of in-person, hybrid, remote being options, to where we got down to talking about specific programming where we actually brought our special education programming back in September. And I think a critical part when you look at the timeline, how much has changed since this has all began and what we've learned is critical. Because I think if we look back at what we know now back then, we probably make some different decisions as we go back through things, but unfortunately we can't go back. But what we do know is we've learned from this process. So as we go forward, I think what I want us to be able to take into effect is we've made a lot of progress from the beginning. So be confident in that you're asking the right questions. We keep bringing back more data and information to you so that we can be moving in the right path. Next slide. I think what confirms that, and one of the things that I hear, because certainly we've had families communicating, reaching out to me, asking me, what are we doing? And all these other schools are going back to in-person. And why are we not? So what I did was I took the 20 high schools that are in Lake County to find out where they were. And this was as of yesterday. And when you look at it, there are currently 11 of the high schools in the county in full remote through the end of the year, so through December. We have 7 schools that are in an adaptive pause. So those are the schools that have said they want to be in session in a hybrid model, but due to the circumstances, have went back into remote. Of the 7 that are in adaptive pause, Barrington is tentatively looked at November 16th as a possible return, pending their metrics. And then Antioch, Lakes, Grant, Libertyville, and Vernon Hills have all said November 30th is a potential return pending metrics. And I think that's what we're going to get into next is about the metrics to see where that's going, because this is very personalized to the communities each of us serve. And then the one that I'd say is still in hybrid right now is Lake Zurich. I don't know how many of you may have watched their board meeting. Even in their board meeting, they talked about going to hybrid. They openly said they're probably going to have to go back to it or anticipating going into another pause after Thanksgiving. So knowing that and going through that, and Lake Forest, they have their students and staff in session. So I think that helps gives us some context that we really do not have as many schools going back in session, I think is what we hear. What we do know is there's at least 2 right now that we're aware of that have students in the building, grades 9 through 12. On a grand scale. What we need to keep in mind, we have been bringing students back in. Our special education populations came in for a while, but due to COVID numbers, they went back out. And those are the things that we're using the data for. I think it's important that we keep stressing we are using the data. And we're hoping that helps us make a good decision for what we could do to make sure we're putting our staff and students in the best position possible to be safe and comfortable in an environment that we want them to teach and learn in. Next slide, please. So when you come to the data, what are we looking at as a school district? We try to look at many different data sets to get comparables. So you look at the state level, you look at the county level, and you look at our local level. First up here is from the state, and all this data is through the Illinois Department of Health. This first 2 points, the potential exposures. So this is just referencing people that may have come in contact, and it's within a 14-day period that they are collecting the contact information through the local visits that person has went to. So it's when they're tracing, they're going and saying, Kevin Myers, where have you been? And they're drilling that down back to the first place they were at where they may have contracted COVID over those 14 days. That's what is comprised of that number. So at the state, for schools only, and that includes private and public, of the total number of potential exposures the last 30 days, 10.5% of the potential exposures in the state occurred at a public or private school. Give perspective. So how do we align as a county, a region? Our region consists of Lake and McHenry. In our region, of the total number of potential exposures that took place last 30 days, Region 9, public and private schools consist of just over 6% of those exposures. So those are just data points. There's all kinds of things you got to look at around that, like how many schools are actually back in session. So you would anticipate that number should be low. And I'd say it relatively is. Next slide. The next one are the actual outbreaks. Now, one thing we've learned during this time, things change all the time. And what we did learn is when the latest report came out, outbreaks used to be defined as 2 occurrences that have occurred within a 14-day period in a common location. That definition has now changed to 5 occurrences or more that are linked to a common location in a 14-day period. So they've increased that. So using that definition at the state level, public schools, now this is public schools only. It does not include private. Actual outbreaks of 5 or more cases in the facility consisted of just over 6% for the entire state. When you compare that to our region, the number's low, total of 4 outbreaks, yet that's still comprised of a total of the 12.1% of the total outbreaks that were in our region. So what you're seeing is there's some patterns there between the state, the county, with what we're seeing for potential exposures and outbreaks. They're just data points for us to be able to look at to see if we're in the ranges. Next slide. So what you got to get down to then is what we're looking at in our metrics committee, which Randy's going to go through here in a minute. But the next one, and I'm just setting this up, you look at our COVID numbers. County, November 7th is the most current for incident rate, is at 53.3. In order to even think about going to some type of a hybrid model, the county metrics say you want to be at 13.9 or less. County's at 53.3. For the county, the positivity rate, there's a lag in the data back to October 27th, but that's what we have right now. And as of that point in time, their positivity rate was at just over 9. The county says to be in a hybrid, they want you at 7.9 or less. So we know roughly a month ago, our numbers were lower than the county. Within that time frame, here's where our numbers are now. As of November 7th, our incident rate's at 54.18. We're now outpacing the county number on that. And then when you look at our positivity rate, It's 11.97, just under 12. Higher than the county. So those are indicators I think we've got to be able to look at and say, how is that impacting us for the decision-making we need to take in order to have staff or students return back to the building now and even going forward? What I'd like to ask is Mr. Lerner on the screen to be able to take us through a little bit deeper with our data sets and our dashboard.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks again to the board and MHS community members tuning in. I'm going to explain two different graphics. These are one of the graphics, the one that's currently up on the screen, is a graphic that we shared at our last Board of Education meeting. And a second graphic that's going to go a little bit more details into our specific D120 data. This dashboard, I just want to reiterate, this dashboard is what we are using to guide us in our conversation, using some of the metrics from Lake County that they have guided us on. And what Kevin just mentioned, that 3.99 is a metric that Lake County has communicated to us, that 14 incident rate threshold, the 8% positivity rate threshold. Those are communicated to us through Lake County, through obviously the support of the IDPH. So everything on this screen, we've used the Lake County and IDPH thresholds as our foundation to start that conversation, to be able to identify where we set our thresholds for phase 1, phase 2s and 3s, and phase 4. And then the second piece of this is the creation of this dashboard has been a very, very collaborative venture. Myself representing administration, Dr. Myers, we've had representation from both of our unions, MEA, MESA, and also members of the board come together on our metrics committee to talk through the metrics that we need to be using and the thresholds for each of those phases. So just reiterating that, and that is the creation of how this dashboard was created. I'm going to quickly go through that again, and you'll notice this time there are some colors. Last time I presented in 2 screens, which had some boxes outlined. We've kind of updated that just so for ease of the eyes to be able to take us there, some different shades of red. But I'm going to talk about the columns. So the vertical columns are our 4 phases. And then the 3 metrics that we are currently using are along the left-hand side. Those will be talked about in rows. So the 3 metrics that we have currently on our dashboard, and I'll quickly, there's a purpose of why I'm using the word currently. In our last meeting, we had hospitalizations was a metric. Since I think it was the day after our last board meeting, the county removed hospitalizations as one of their suggested metrics because of 2 reasons. One, those metrics that the hospitalizations was bouncing up and down and wasn't a very consistent data points to be looking at for decision making. And 2, what they were seeing is a lot of the hospitalizations were not of school-aged peoples. So they do have on their dashboard that hospitalizations has been removed as a metric. However, the Lake County Health Department is always monitoring hospitalizations. And if hospitalizations were to ever, again, become an issue in Lake County, ICU beds, so on and so forth, that it would be possible that hospitalizations would be a metric that they would, again, put on their suggested considerations. So the 3 metrics that we are currently using on the left-hand side is incidence rate measured per 100,000 people, positivity percentage, and testing. Along the top, the phases being all the way from phase 1, a all student remote setting, to phase 4 being a full in-person. And again, where Lake County guided us in those numbers is they guide us in the number of, I'm going to use incidence rate, for example. When incidence rate is 14 or higher, so as Dr. Myers mentioned, that 13.99. So when incidence rate is 14 or higher, that would indicate the consideration for a virtual setting. When incidence rate would be lower than 7, that's where we'd have considerations for a full in-person learning. And full in-person learning is unfortunately a long time away, but that would also take some guidance from the governor's office to be able to get us back into that full in-person setting. What the committee was able to do is talk about, well, what happens when we're between 7 and 14 for positivity rate percentage, when we're between 5 and 8. And once again, we just took those numbers, split the middle, and created those two middle phases, which is just for us to be able to scaffold in the idea of phase 2 being a hybrid model where we're starting to really focus on some focused student groups, bringing small populations back in. And then in phase 3, when the metrics allow, then having a hybrid consideration that would have larger groups, something more along the lines of what Mr. Pope presented earlier for that hybrid model. So as of this afternoon at 5 o'clock, this data hasn't changed. Overall, District 120 would be in phase 1. The reason we would be in phase 1 is the way that this dashboard guides us is whichever one of the 3 metrics is in the lowest phase, that's where we are as a district. And the data kind of is supporting that piece. Our incidence rate, and I'll show you in a minute some of the raw numbers. Dr. Myers had kind of given you a preview of that. Our incidence rate, one more piece to that is when we move a metric to a specific phase, we only move it after we've seen 7 consecutive days of data within that range. So we have had more than 7 consecutive days, unfortunately, many more than 7 consecutive days of an incidence rate that is greater than 14, putting incidence rate into that phase 1. Our positivity percentage within the 7 last data points, we have had, it guides us to say that our positivity percentage would be in phase 2. And then testing, as you're going to see in a second, testing in Lake County has been very solid since really July, when we've been able to get some of that data. Testing has been hovering around 2 that whole time. So that putting us for phase 4 for the metric of testing. But again, overall, we're looking at the metric that is in the lowest setting to really guide us on the level of safety of our building and our community of bringing staff and students back into the building. So that's how this dashboard is being used, again, indicating that we are currently in phase 1 as a district. Next slide, please, Ms. Ortiz. So what this shows is this shows some of our actual metrics. Really quickly, both of these slides, the previous slide and this one, are now available in real time. So anytime that we're getting new, I say real time in the sense that as soon as we as Mundelein High School District 120 update this data, the public is able to access this. This was sent out last week to our staff and our board, and I believe also to our public through an email that had a link being able to have a website where this information is hosted. And earlier this afternoon, there were links added also to our district d120.org website that give access right from our school websites to be able to give the public access to this data. So this dashboard is our data dashboard, which we are going to communicate the 7 most recent days of data that we have. I'm actually going to talk through these from right to left to be able to point out a few things. One, diagnostic testing. And if also in positivity percentage, you'll notice the most recent data point is October 27th. Dr. Myers did mention that there is a little bit of a lag on those 2 data points. We are inquiring with the Lake County Health Departments to give some explanation as to what that lag, what is occurring and causing that lag. But as of October 27th, the testing data points, again, the 7 most recent days have all been showing an average 2-day turnaround of the testing, putting us in phase 4, meaning diagnostic testing is not a metric at this time that we need to be concerned about. for District 120. Positivity percentage, again, October 27th being the most recent data point. Really quickly, now I'll take a quick second and you'll see some of those raw numbers. So again, where phase 2 changes to phase 1 was that 8% threshold. So you'll notice October 21st and 22nd, those District 120 weighted average metrics indicating phase 2. The 5 most recent days have been above 8, indicating phase 1. We haven't had 7 consecutive data points yet because we still have some data missing, which is why on that previous slide, positivity percentage was still in phase 2. But as you notice, those numbers unfortunately are trending in an increasing direction. So it is very possible that when we get the fill in the missing data since October 27th, that we may be moving that metric for positivity percentage. Really quickly, the District 120 weighted average, both for positivity percentage and incidence rate, just a quick reminder is that you can go on the dashboard and look at Lake County as a whole. And that's some of their graphs show Lake County as a whole. Again, through that collaborative conversation in the metrics committee, we wanted to be able to look at obviously considerations of the county as a whole, but really look, there are times when the county as a whole doesn't describe what our district is. And that's where we created the District 120 weighted averages for positivity percentage and incidence rate, which takes into account the student populations of what's in our building that comes from our different communities. We have students in our building from multiple communities, not just Mundelein, and both of those weighted averages take into account that we have students coming from multiple communities. So again, positivity percentage indicating that we are in phase 2, unfortunately with an increasing trend. And then incidence rate is right now what's guiding us to be in phase 1. We have 7 consecutive days, as you can see in phase 1. There are actually, unfortunately, many more days of phase 1 data before that as well. The weighted average, again, the threshold from what guided the change between phase 2 and phase 1, a hybrid consideration for small focused student groups versus the virtual setting. As Dr. Myers mentioned on the last slide, that threshold was 13.99, anything above that. And we've been above 35 for the past seven data points. And unfortunately, I've crept into the 50s for the past couple days. And that has continued. They did update this evening just prior to the board meeting, November 8th and 9th, which can be accessed on that website. But those have also been data points into the 50s, in the mid 50s, unfortunately. So that's the incidence rate guiding us, into that phase 1 considerations and showing us just the trend, looking at that as not just the increasing nature of that nature, but how far away it is from that 13.99 or 14 threshold to be able to guide us in some of our decisions that I know Dr. Myers is going to continue talking about.
So up next, we've got a special guest coming out. Not only is it for our school data, but we've got some in regards to staff and student related to COVID. So that's been Shane to go over that with you.
I was expecting a larger audience. Okay. Okay.
Make sure you speak nice and loudly so our audience virtually can.
Okay. So over the summer, the Illinois Department of Public Health created a decision tree that provided schools guidance on what to do if you had a staff or student that developed COVID-like symptoms, was exposed to someone who had COVID or tested positive for COVID themselves. And so since the beginning of this semester, the nurses and my department have maintained data on students and staff who have fit those 3 criteria. As you can see, the top graphic demonstrates the number of students that have been reported to the nurses for those 3. And then the bottom are for staff. I should note that of the 4 staff that have tested positive for COVID. We notified the Lake County Health Department. They conducted contact tracing, and all 4 were determined to have not had any type of exposure or contraction at school. As we begin to anticipate what our workforce will look like when we return to a hybrid model, the staff have obviously explored what type of leave options that might be available. There are 2 primary leave options and 1 type of accommodation. So an ADA accommodation means that they have a documented underlying medical condition that evidences that COVID exposure could have a significant negative medical outcome. At this time, we're talking severe impairment or death. And so 17 staff have requested and been granted those accommodations. Those accommodations range from either working in a private space to limit exposure to others or being able to continue their essential job functions remotely. We have had a number of preliminary FMLA leave requests. These are from staff who, depending upon the circumstances, do not feel that it is safe to return to the building. In this circumstance, we don't have anybody that has taken that leave yet because we're working remotely. I think a lot of it will depend on what our external county and state numbers look like when we make that decision. That will influence the staff, but staff have certainly explored that as an option. And then the last piece is the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act. And this is a federal extension of FMLA that provides a provision for childcare leave. That isn't quite applicable right now. And so that is why we have such a low number of staff that has expressed or stated interest in that. The huge caveat here is that expires at the end of this calendar year. And it is unknown at this time what, if any, extension that will receive. So these numbers are fluid. I anticipate getting additional requests once a return date is identified so that we can get a better understanding of what our workforce will look like when we return to the building. Any questions?
Shane, just out of curiosity, you said the 4 teachers were all found to not have contracted it at school.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know about the 8 students?
So the 8 students, what we were able to identify, and I would have to go back into my numbers, most of that has been at home through contact tracing. And these numbers aren't absolute. And the reason being is if a student has COVID symptoms or a staff member has COVID symptoms, but they feel well, they're going to work and they're not going to report that to us. What we are finding more often are the direct contacts. So when we did the testing, and students knew that they're going to be returning to the building, there was a lot more communication with the nurses at that time. When we held a professional development opportunity in the building for staff, that's when we became more aware. But one thing that I am seeing is, and it seems to happen on Tuesdays, as our staff are living their lives on the weekend, they get notified that, oh, well, my hairdresser, had another client who tested positive for COVID, and I saw that person 2 hours before I saw you. So the staff member then contacts us and says, okay, what should I do? Or we're having situations with daycare providers where a daycare provider becomes positive and then a child becomes positive, and due to the teacher or the staff members living in the same home as the child, then they need to self-isolate. So we are seeing that a little bit more frequently, and so it complements the numbers that you see on the screen. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
So the planning ahead, really for us, what's next? Kurt referenced, we need to be able to set a staff date that they can return back to the building, regardless if we're in a remote learning mode or hybrid. Some of the things that we want to be able to do as a district to make sure we're prepared for that is to make sure we have child supervision if we can provide that for our staff, because we've heard that's one of the things that our staff would be able to be an assistance for them. So Andy Searle's working on that. You've heard Mike Pope talk earlier about substitutes needed. We really need to start drilling down on that to know what we would need for staffing. And that is relying upon the type of schedule that we also want to be able to implement. You can see that between the number of groups, 2 groups of students or 3. There's an impact to that. But we do want to find out how many subs we can get. And we do want to also investigate one of the orders from the governor. It makes it easier to have somebody come in to be a supervisor. They still need to go through all the vetting process, but we could have community volunteers come in and fill some of those positions potentially. And we need to see what's the availability or willingness of people to do that. We need to be prepared for second semester. So we know we will be looking at potentially changing what the hybrid model would look like. That depends on tonight. We would need to get a survey back out for our students and parents to see what their interest would be based off of that model. We have about 4 weeks to do that because we really need to get to work on that because the end of this semester is not that far away. We need to investigate additional mitigation measures. So mitigation measures are the procedures we're putting in place to limit the access of our staff or students with the individuals that may have COVID. So one of the things we want to look at, I listened to the Stevenson board meeting the other night. Andy's researching this, Searle. They have a screening procedure that they're going to implement and to see what that would entail. We have already applied through the state to receive antigen tests to see if we can't have access to those so we can test our staff or students for early identification as well. So if they do get into the building, we can send them home promptly and know whether or not they did have COVID or not. And if not, have them be able to stay. So academically, they can continue that part of their education. And then the last one is, we want to be able to develop a partnership with an infectious disease doctor to be able to provide guidance for us. So we've reached out to Advocate Health, got one other option that I'm looking into to be able to have that doctor accessible to us to meet with us from administrative, board, and staff perspective to be able to give us feedback. So it help us alleviate some of maybe our concerns and fears and add to the ideas that we are coming up. So those are some things that we're looking to be able to do. The next slide, here's what I need from you. These are the discussion steps I want to have with you. Right now, what we've went through, we have been in an adaptive pause for this semester. Projecting out, look at best case scenario, it's going to be 2 to 3 weeks before we could even potentially think of students and staff returning to the building. That puts us through the first week of December for this term. What I'm asking the board is we stay in remote learning through this term. And then what I'd like to also do is say, starting on January 11th, that's the second week back from winter break, we have staff report to the building. Now, school begins on January 4th. Why am I asking for a week later? The reason we're asking is everybody will be just coming off of winter break. That's the time of year. Some people will travel, families usually get together. We want to have 1 week, a 1 week buffer so that if somebody does develop symptoms, they can do the right thing, stay home and take care of that before we actually get back into the building. And then, so that would still be through remote learning that first week, regardless of what we do plan wise. Then January 11th, staff would be in. That gives them time to get acclimated to their classroom, procedures in place. And for us, once the opportunity based off the hybrid numbers, because we want to be basing this off of the numbers. We don't want to make this emotional decision. When we feel it's safe, and the numbers are showing us that it's in a safer zone for us to bring students back to the building, we want to be able to move quicker. So by doing that, with having a January 11th date, we believe that enables us to do that. And then finally, the hybrid plan. I'm going to ask that we don't bring any more hybrid plans back to you, in all seriousness. What I am asking is that you entrust us to be able to create and maximize a hybrid schedule that has the students here in the building, maximizing the time they're with their teachers, based off the number of students that want to be in that hybrid plan. So that way, I think we're clear on what we're looking for, what you want. I think we've clearly heard you. You want the students in the building and you want them in more. So do we. But I don't want to get stuck on a plan, whether it's an AM, PM model, 2-day alternating day. We're looking for that flexibility. So I'm not asking you to vote, but I am asking you to have that discussion and go around each of those points. And I do want to know from you because you represent our community. And I think it's important that we hear from you because it's your role. You've earned that, you're a board member. To hear, I'm asking, can you approve a plan saying verbally, we'll stay remote for the rest of this term through December, plan on staff returning January 11th into the building, and then have that hybrid plan created so it's ready no later than January 11th. Now open the floor up to the board.
I'm just gonna kind of go around to everyone, and if there's any comments you want to make or any statements you feel like the administration needs to hear, now's your moment. Just one clarification. Staff has the ability to come in right now and teach from the school if they so choose, right?
Yes.
Okay, so is there a percent that is doing so?
It's been a while since we actually went around the building. Last time we looked at it, it ranged around 30% of the staff, 35 would come into the building during a week's time.
Okay. All right, because I think the biggest thing is now with the numbers going the way they are, there is a bit of apprehension if the numbers keep going up. We have now a solid plan in place for how we're going to allow staff in the building, cleaning measures that are in place. If anyone, parents have questions, we can go over that in more detail. Kevin Quinn went over a little bit in detail last time for us, but we have a very, very solid plan to make it as safe as possible for staff to come in. And then we're going to continue. Kevin, Peter, you were on the metrics committee. There's a pretty solid plan of what metrics we're following. So it is not just an emotional decision. It is based on data and what is safe and acceptable.
Yeah, and I can chime in too. I think the metrics certainly tell us a story right now, right?
Yes, they do.
There's more COVID around now than there ever has been. That doesn't mean we haven't also figured out different ways to live our lives. I've even come across research that suggests we're probably better at living safe lives when we are returning to environments where, protocol are in place for cleaning, for mask wearing. We tend to keep our social distance better when we are, in our place of work or at meetings like this than we do when we're at home or on Halloween or gatherings that were around familiar people. So I think, the data in terms of the metrics are telling us, yes, there's a lot of COVID. At the same time, that doesn't mean we can't take steps to protect ourselves and others. I am all for getting our students back to school. And I know most of us are. The vast majority of us are. We can do that, but to think that we can do that between now and the beginning of winter break is probably foolish. The data would also tell us that that's a likely impossible feat. After winter break, though, we don't know. But in order to be able to be in a position to do that, we have to have our staff back. And I think that there's a reasonable expectation that we can have staff in the building, we can be safe in the building, we can teach from the building. And I think our students want our staff in the building. I think our staff wants to be in the building. So I am all for the remainder of the term being as is. I'm all for staff returning, and I think holding a week off after the return is a good idea. But I also think it's reasonable to move forward with staff in the building who can come based on what Shane laid out. And in terms of the type of plan, I'm a little confused, Kevin. Are you asking us to endorse the idea of the hybrid again? or are you asking for opinions and thoughts on which plan? You're just simply asking us not to go back and make a new plan?
Right, so essentially what I'm asking is, last time you asked us to come back with an AM/PM proposal. I want us to be able to leave this meeting knowing that if our numbers of students that want to come back to a hybrid are beyond what we can hold capacity wise in the AM/PM model, you as a board know that we are not going to be able to do that. So I'm essentially asking you to trust us from an administrative perspective. We're going to implement a hybrid plan that maximizes the amount of instructional time our kids can be in the building with staff.
Okay.
That may be, Peter, the AM/PM you saw. It might be the model we showed you last month, where it was Monday, Tuesday, red group, Thursday, Friday, gray group. It may be, like Mike said, we remove the middle yellow day. But we're not going to be able to give you that in advance, really, until we know the number of kids. So I'm looking for that leniency to be able to do that.
May I go? Are you finished, Peter?
Yeah, I'll stop.
Sorry. So I think one of the messages we had for you before, and the idea of an AM/PM, I think it was an example of our eagerness to see how to get more days back in school. So, and thank you for looking at that option, exploring multiple options, including having fewer groups. And so I support everything that you talked about. I do also support us getting students back into school who want to come to school. The only thing I would say differently here is that I do believe that we're asking you to try to increase instructional time. However, I wouldn't say that's the only driver, because we are still going to have a large number of students who are learning virtually on any day, and some students that is going to be the only way in which they learn. So I don't know that maximization is necessarily the optimal. So I would also encourage you to be factoring in the quality of the overall experience for the most number of students, and considering the needs of all students, even if they're learning virtually all the time.
Understood.
Okay, I'll be short. I know you didn't ask for an opinion on the planned hybrid or the AM/PM, but if I had a voice, I would say the AM/PM one sounds like a logistic nightmare. That's just my opinion on that. I'm all for the school starting remote after this semester back in January. It makes sense given all their numbers and everybody's safe. And actually, I think Mundelein High School looks actually to be probably one of the better decision makers in Lake County, because we didn't waffle back and forth on going remote and then coming out of remote and then back in person. Our numbers were going up. We knew that all along. We knew the safer course was to stay remote. My only concern, actually it's a big concern, is we know that students are struggling with remote. We have 4 weeks to go. What can we do in these next 4 weeks that we can connect with some of these students that are struggling, that aren't getting any answers, so to speak? Can they make an appointment with a teacher, a counselor, to come into the building and get some sort of face-to-face connection before the January 19th in-person hybrid begins? We've all heard the good news about a vaccine, and it sounds like this is the smartest plan, because in January we could be in inoculations could be occurring, right at that time. So it makes sense to do January. But I'm really concerned that we need in the next 4 weeks to reach out to these kids that are struggling remote, and even if they come in, for an hour to meet a teacher, I'd like some teachers to meet us in the middle here and say, I know I'm teaching remote, but I will go to the high school on a certain day to meet some of my students that are struggling to get that in-person connection. So that's where I stand.
Sure.
Okay, I also am 100% supportive of staying remote for the remainder of the term. I know my own 2 girls expressed distress at constantly changing of the schedules So, and the numbers are not indicating that we're anywhere near going back to a hybrid at this point. So I think, and giving us a week after break, I think it's shown that after break and when we go indoors, I mean, we've been unbelievably lucky with this last couple of weeks of weather, but that will not hold until January, as we all know. So I'm fine with that. Staff who would like to come into the building, I would encourage them. I think it's good for the students to see you in. But I like having the return date of January 11th so that we have that buffer week. And, you know, it's a little bit difficult. You read a lot of information of what the numbers they're predicting for the winter are. And unfortunately, it's not very positive outlook right now for January. So this could go a little bit longer than we had hoped. I trust that you'll pick the right hybrid. I do know that my own children wanted to go more often. They felt that 2 days every other week wasn't like their ideal. So I will trust that you guys will come up with what works best for our students. And again, all of our students, like Lisa, I would chime in with what you said. This is challenging, you know, I have 2 kids and it's very challenging to keep that motivation, but parents too, I feel like we need to encourage them. You have to be the cheerleader right now. We will get through this. It's going to be okay. This is a brief moment in time. And I've advocated for my own children. If you're having problems, teachers have office hours, right?
Correct.
So you can make an appointment. My one daughter has met with her college counselor. I mean, doing college applications in the FAFSA and FAs is all a big challenge right now too. But I've asked her to, you know, this is your executive decision, your skills at this point for some of the older students. This is a moment to encourage them. Take control. Don't let this take control of you. You put yourself out there and do your best to make the best out of a difficult time. So that would be my 2 cents.
I'm all forward to also, you know, the learning yourself because it's kind of discouraging on the students when you set a date, like first we said like October 28th and then we moved out to November or so, and they get all anxious about coming back to school. I'm sure like the same as the teachers and the students, and now having more like a day like having a good more into the end of the semester and then make sense that coming back in January 11th. That way the teachers will be prepared too, and all the teachers will be prepared. And that way the parents could be planning to and saying with the students, like, okay, this is more depending on the numbers too. You know, we're hoping that it will get better before it gets worse or some. And on the hybrid plans, you know, I know you have shown so many models already or so because of the situation keeps on changing. But I do hope that you get the most students back, and yeah, we trust you guys to do the best decision for all the students and to move forward on having all the students as back as possible too.
Understood. Thank you.
I know as a parent and a community member, when we weren't able to reopen on the 26th, that was devastating for students, for families, for parents. And as much as I would love to take another shot at getting the kids back in the building this semester, you are exactly right. I don't want to see what's been happening in other districts where they say they're going to come back, and they're not going to come back, and then they are going to come back. I know, you know, everyone was talking about Vernon Hills and Libertyville are going back. We should go back. They decided at the 11th hour to not go back. Now they're talking about going back in 3 weeks. I don't want the kids to be, or you and the staff for that matter, to be on that kind of a yo-yo. It's just not good for anybody. And I think the best way to move forward is just come up with a plan and stick with a plan that we think is actually feasible. I don't think it's feasible to say we're going to try to go back in 2 weeks, because realistically, I don't think that's going to happen. We're saying right now it's going to be remote for the remainder of the term, and then we'll start back up second semester. I think in the interim, to Tom's point, I completely agree. In the rest of this remaining semester, we've got to do whatever we can to help out those kids that are struggling, because we know there's a lot of them that are struggling. You know, we're getting the emails. We've all got, you know, kids in different situations. Maybe we have kids at the high school, maybe we have younger kids, but we all know that the kids are struggling. So I think in this interim here, almost as a break for all of you too, we're saying right now, stop trying to figure out how to get kids back in the building in 2 weeks, and let's just do whatever we can to help the kids in the remote setting the rest of the semester, because that's the setting they're going to be in the rest of the semester. So I would say absolutely, I think it makes sense at this point to stay remote for the remainder of the semester. I also really like the return date for January 11th. I'm hopeful that gives, all the staff 2 months from tomorrow, basically, to figure out each of their individual situations and what's going to work or not work for them. So everybody has time to prepare. And then what that also does, in the community, people have been saying, we want to know what the plan is. I think it's just great to have a date set that this is where we're going to move forward. I 100% agree with not bringing anybody back to the building right after winter break. And then, maybe potentially the students come back a week after the staff comes back, because that gives the students 2 weeks or whatever it may be. And, to Tom's point again, I think when second semester starts, it's probably realistic to assume even if the teachers are back, the students are going to be in a remote setting at least for a little bit of time. So what can we do to help the students not get off to the start that they got off to this fall, and help them better acclimate to the start of second semester before we can hopefully start bringing them back. The third one, as far as the hybrid plan, I would agree. You guys have been making so many plans. It's plan after plan. I think it's time for us to just, turn that over to you completely and just trust that you're going to make the best decisions for the kids. The two biggest things I've been hearing in the community for sure are more in-person instruction and more instructional time. I think both plans, even the revert to the old one you showed us tonight, if there are less groups, takes care of the more face-to-face time. The only suggestion I would make with either schedule is there a way that we can increase that weekly instructional time so we're getting somewhere closer to where we were pre-COVID, whether that's in-person instruction or virtual instructions or anywhere in that schedule we can find more time for that. But I am a definite yes on all three of those things you've got up there.
Okay. Thank you for your feedback. We have clear direction and we'll get moving forward. Thank you very much. Up next, shifting gears then, Dr. Kroll is going to go over the Article 5 Memorandum of Understanding.
All right, good evening. Before I start, I know there was a question at the beginning of the meeting and I didn't quite hear it. I think, Tom, you asked a question about, was it process of evaluation?
Yeah, if you can just explain the process as well.
All right, very good. Actually, that's where I'm going to start. So the typical process for evaluating our teaching staff there is in two groups. First of all, we have non-tenured teachers, the first 4 years of their service. There's always a cycle of 2 informals, observations, and then 1 formal observation. And for the first and second year teachers, that's usually done twice in a year. And then for the year 3 and 4s, that reduces down to 1 cycle a year. And so that's a little bit more, that's quite more rigorous than our tenured staff. Our tenured staff, after they've made that, that into the tenured arena, we vetted that out and we believe that they are of the quality that we want of them in our building. They go on a 2-year cycle. So all tenured teachers are on a 2-year cycle. In year 1, they have an informal, at least 1 informal. That's the mandatory is 1 informal. There could be more, but that's the least that happens. In year 2, there's an informal observation, a formal observation, and then there's a summative rating that happens, which incorporates everything from those observations to any other observations or non-evaluatory observations from the classroom, things that teachers participate in throughout those 2 years. All that becomes part of that summative rating in the end of year 2. This MOU addresses only tenured staff. Our non-tenured staff will continue to be evaluated as we always have, as we believe that we need to make sure that we go through that process with our non-tenured staff for their benefit and their growth. And so that we know that by the time they make through their 4 years, that they are of the quality that we would like them to be in order to be a member of our staff. So that is not changing in this MOU. The MOU is only pertains to tenured staff. And in regards to that, it still says that all tenured staff will have an informal observation this year, no matter what level, where they're at in their 2-year cycle, with half our staff starting their first year and the other half of our staff, if you will, in their second year of their 2-year cycle. Everyone will receive an informal observation, at least one. However, what the MOU does ask for is it does ask that those who are going to receive a summative rating this year would receive the same summative rating that they received 2 years ago at the end of their second year cycle, or their 2-year cycle. So if they received an excellent 2 years ago, that they would receive an excellent again this year. If they received a proficient, then they would receive a proficient as well. There are no other ratings of staff from 2 years ago that are different than those 2 ratings. Want to also mention that, my notes. There was a question that came from you earlier this week. What about misconduct? There already is approved mechanisms within our contract that we can address misconduct. So it's not as if that isn't going to be addressed through this MOU. Misconduct would be through those approved mechanisms that we have. In essence, what we really want our teachers to do this year, with all the different things that are being thrown at them, is that we wanted them to spend their time and energy really to create the best educational experience in the classroom community and culture that they possibly can. That's what they're most worried about in achieving. So that is what we're trying to achieve with this MOU. Any other questions?
Are getting any opportunities if they're having any issues from virtual learning with, with whatever technological or content or whatever? Are they being offered any support or additional training or just resources that they can turn to if they are struggling?
Absolutely. So as we began the start of the year, Stacy and a number of our other staff who are all a part of Stacy's professional development team were really pounding out an awesome amount of experiences for our staff. When you're asking them to bring on skills regarding Canvas and other Zoom and other tools along the way that they are completely new to, mandated to use along the way as well as trying to augment their curriculum a little bit in order to make it work along the way. There's a ton of support that has come from the professional development team. That is continuing to this day. And actually the professional development team has been asking for teachers their response to what else can we do to help support you even now as we are in this, where we are at this point, and knowing that at some day we will be coming back at a hybrid. So that conversation has been continuing and still working on a daily basis.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Oh, we need the course guide?
Yep, there's one more. I have one more. We're ready to move on. All right. This is the typical time of year where we ask you to approve our course guide with any alterations, deletions, or additions. Last year, there are some things from last year's course guide that we just have not been able to implement quite yet. So you're not going to see a ton of changes from last year's course guide to this year's. Matter of fact, there's no alterations and there's no deletions from our course guide at this time. We do have 3 additions that I want to make you aware of. 2 of which, or actually 1 of which we started mid-year last year. And so we wanted to make it official. We have had in the past a freshman intervention class that helps students with uncovering the academic steps in order to access their learning. It provided, targeted literacy instruction to improve reading, writing, vocabulary, and executive functioning. That was very, very successful with our freshmen. And then those freshmen would become sophomores, juniors, and seniors, and that support would vaporize. So we have started academic seminar, which would be the same thing as academic literacy from freshman year, but it's for the older students. So that would be one of the courses that we are asking you to approve. A second one is geometry seminar. This is for freshmen only, that we would identify through our placement process with middle schools using our test data and their teacher recommendations. The course is designed to provide the geometry content that by state standards that's required, along with pre-algebra skills. And after this course, freshman year, they would have then their course requirement for geometry. They would proceed on to Algebra 1, sophomore year, and then Algebra 2, junior year. And we believe that that would allow them some extra time with some pre-algebra skills without keeping them out of their sequence, in order for them to receive their 3 years of mandated math. Of course, we would always encourage and will continue to encourage a 4th year math, because in particular, this class would not be NCAA compliant. So if a student was going to play collegiate athletics, they would need 1 more year of math in order to complete that, and they would still have the time in order to complete that before their graduation date. So Randy and the math department has thought about how they could offer this extra support for a particular group of students and make sure that they graduate on time and with all the additions of what they needed to have done in order to be compliant with a number of different choices they might be making. And then finally, transitional English would be an addition as a 4th year English class. This class would be for seniors only. It is a mirror image of the transitional math class in the sense that it is a course that has been, it meets the requirements of the Post-Secondary and Workforce Readiness Act, which asked for a high school course that corresponded with the local community college that would, upon successful completion, would allow the student to go beyond and start credit-bearing college courses in math and English as a freshman in college. This is a course for English that will use the same curriculum as CLC, the same grading techniques as well. We have had one of our English teachers already work on being trained and take additional courses. So she will be the teacher of record for this course, and she's trained in order to do so now. So this course in essence is helping to avoid students from having to take a remedial reading class in their first year of college. And that would be the only changes to our course guide for the coming school year.
Anthony, I have a quick question on the course guide. Last month, we had the meeting with the Black Student Union, and part of that discussion was, offering, I thought it was about offering some classes to the students about the general history of, ethnic groups and just really the history. What's the time frame to get something like that on as a course guide here at the school?
That is a great question. So typically, when we have ideas that are incubating like that, we work them through from this time through the summer. We do some preliminary curriculum writing in the summer, and then we bring it to you in October or November. And then we continue to write that course, finish it off the summer immediately before, and then we would start teaching it.
Thank you.
Any modifications, request to our student group, it could be August of 22. Could start it. Or offer.
Correct.
Ready for next?
Yeah.
All right, here we go. School Board Policy 680. It is a second and final reading. This is about teaching controversial issues. Why we are changing it. Our policy was more than 5 years old. So once our attorney had seen that, she'd asked us to please look at the current one that's in Press Plus, which is what we have here before you. What we wanted to make sure that we did have addressed in there was the controversial issues that could come up, whether it was in the classroom by a teacher or with having a guest in there. And what this policy really has done is really cleaned up a lot of the policy that we had before. It made it into really bullet points, to 5 clean bullet points that's very easily readable and something that we can convey to our staff so that they know what to be able to do in the classroom and should we have guests come in as well. Questions on that policy? Okay. Another exciting topic coming up next is the School Board Policy 2265. So we had actually approved this, and upon further review before submitting, I asked about the conducting of hearings and the level of evidence, because we went through and approved this plan. After further review, our attorney has recommended that we do not have the hearing conducted, nor do we increase the level of heightened evidence needed to prove in any such case. So instead be a preponderance of a doubt. So that's one of the cases where we're really looking at, that's more protection for us as a school district and be able to how we can prove something or not within the case in regards to policy 2265. So that's why we are bringing it back to you before having that submitted for press. Okay. All right. Normally, next week, we'd be going down to Chicago, the Triple I conference. That is not happening this year. It's going to take place virtually. So we have the virtual events to go to, and we have the resolutions that we want to be able to address for Tom, because he's representing you down there with the resolution. So now is the time. Typically, we want to be able to know who is planning on attending the virtual meetings. There's really, 4 meetings or 4 virtual meetings on December 20th. And if I'm reading it right, they're from 10:05 through 1 o'clock. You can attend 1, 2, 3, 4. It's up to you. And they have 2 keynote speakers, one starting at 9:10, which topic is how to deconstruct racism, one headline at a time. And then the ending guest speaker that we have, or will be attending that meeting, flying a plane while remodeling it. How inclusive leaders rise to the challenge called 2020. So those are 2 of the things that you can go to. The other 4 things are the great opportunity, 21st century learning through community engagement. I'm just going to share with you that is a topic that is at every event. So I'm going to expect many of you might have already seen or been taking that one. The other one is overcoming generational poverty, which is also certainly timely for us as a district, just with everything that we experience. The other one is empowering students to support peers regarding mental health. And then the last one is empowering every student every day. So I think what we want to be able to know at this time, and you want to help facilitate the conversation more, is who does plan on participating in the virtual event, and if there's enough, do we want everybody on the board to attend at least one of the virtual meetings so that everybody can share out that of the contents of those meetings or not? And there is no pressure on this at all.
Okay, first of all, let's just kind of go around and see. I unfortunately am not available to attend that day.
December 20th.
Yeah.
November.
November.
November, okay.
Um,
I didn't think we can look at work either, so I can't.
okay.
Yeah, I'm able to, I just have not selected anything. So if there's a topic, it sounds like some candidates, there's a topic you guys want me to attend, I'll definitely attend that. I just have not selected what to do, but I can attend.
Okay.
I can make it happen and I can go to Lady Gaga.
Okay, so Peter, Anna, maybe you could take note of, yeah, and yeah, hold on, just a minute. Anna, you just make note. Peter can attend, we'll do Lady Gaga. Lisa, are you able to attend anything? Unmute yourself, honey. Sorry.
Finding it, yes. Yeah, I was able to attend the 10:55 and the 11:30 sessions, overcoming poverty and mental health.
Tom, maybe you pick something other than those two. Aaron, are you able to attend?
I'm a maybe right now.
Okay. All right, and then I will check with Laura Mellon and have her get back to us. I would love it if everybody who can attend would at least share a brief summary of what they learned. We do have a book here from Ruby Bridges about getting out of poverty that I've read, that if anybody is interested in. Lisa, if you're interested in that book, I went to that particular presentation a year or two ago and it was very worthwhile, and the book is helpful, but it might be something you could combine your knowledge from that. Yeah. So, Anna, is there a definite deadline that we have to get back to it, or is like tomorrow it?
No, it's November it's one day before, like at 2 o'clock, it's a hard cutoff date.
Okay, so if anybody, like, if your schedule opens up at the last minute, Aaron, you are welcome to, it can be a quick last minute thing. Next thing is we need to advise Tom on the delegate issues, and Tom has kind of made a brief summary of each one, and we can just kind of go through and let him know what our stand is as a board so that he can vote according to what we, to represent us. So Tom, I'll turn that over to you.
Sure, there's 8 resolutions that we either adopt or not adopt, and then there's 3 reaffirmations, and then just a belief statement. So I don't know if anybody had a chance to look at them, if they just want to, rattle off, what you feel on it. The first one is the loan program. The meeting was like about 2.5 hours, and that one was, it was interesting, idea, concept. But the overall suggestion was it lacked clarity on what was involved in it. So I don't want to take what you guys read them. If you want to just let me know.
Yeah, reading the description, it just sounded like there's just too much uncertainty in doing something like that.
Okay. So I mean, just if you want to go around and say we may not adopt. The recommendation is to not adopt it. So it's up to you guys.
So stick with the recommendation.
Okay, 1, 2. Okay, everybody. No.
Yep.
Okay.
Lisa?
Second. Oh, Lisa, you have to.
Yeah, I was inclined to support this one. I agree there's not enough specificity about it, and I understand that that there's reluctance to talk about creating a loan system without knowing exactly how the funding is. But I also think that there might be some short-term needs because of the pandemic that would necessitate short-term loans and affordable loans for some school districts. So I don't have a strong opinion, but I had netted out as a support on that one.
Okay. The second one is the gun storage resolution. Recommendation is to not adopt, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of discussion. Real quick, I'll just say that it was again downstate versus upstate type issue.
I'll just say I personally wasn't support. There should be. You should have gun storage does relate to schools, so I feel like it would be something that you would want to have. Okay.
The that's what kind of what it was. The online discussion really was exactly what Laura said, and the opposite was again you shouldn't come into the home of somebody to tell them what they have to do, that type of thing.
My thought is a lot of student shootings and whether it be suicide or other things relate to how guns are stored at home. And this is my opinion. I just feel like that is something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, it was split. The conversation was split really 50-50. I'll side with Laura. I see no problem with requiring someone to have a gun store. If you're gonna have a gun, have a lock in your house, for it.
So what I understood is that there are already rules around the requirement of adults to store their guns if someone 14 years of age or younger is going to have access to it, and that what this is asking us to advocate for is to raise that to age 18. And I'm inclined to support it, as you guys were talking about. The rationale they said to oppose it was they said that this is really kind of outside the realm of what we do because it's not directly education related. But I would say gun safety and anything having to do with not only gun safety itself, but the mental health that goes with more peace of mind, that we should put in as many additional requirements and responsibilities as we can. I think it's absolutely affects education. So I support it as well.
I kind of wavered back and forth on it, to be honest. Through my initial read, I was not necessarily in favor of supporting it. So you can put me down as a DNA on that one. That's almost like Aaron. How about it?
I was kind of the same way. I felt like I was missing something. Like why are they endorsing to not support this? What am I missing? I'm not sure what it was. Like why they're not endorsing, why they're not recommending to endorse it.
Well, I think their point was what Richard said was not that you agree with it or disagree with it, but whose role is it? And if we're going to take that step further in, what else is that put on the policy?
Yeah, so the cliff notes of against it was the school boards have a role in keeping kids safe in school, but they should not dictate what happens in the home. Students might be more successful if the school got involved in all aspects of their life, including regulating sleep, nutrition, all that stuff. So against is basically saying, if you're going to go into the home, you're going to have to tell them everything. What Lisa's point is exactly what it is. It's just saying it's already there for 14. They just want to get it to 18. That's all.
And the data shows that a lot of the violence that happens with guns in schools is for people in that age range of 15 plus. And the question is, do we want parents to be responsible, or adults in general to be responsible for keeping guns locked up from people who are in that 14 to 18 age range or 15 to 18 age range? And I would say adults need to be responsible for all of their guns more generally, but for anything that could harm people that young people would have access to.
I was like opposed to it or something. So I think it's just kind of separate from the school. That's more like a school issue or so. I know the most questions like the young kids and stuff, but I mean, having them locked, but it is not kind of the school decision to make.
Aaron, what was your?
I'm a yes.
You're yes to not adopt it or adopt it?
To adopt.
Adopt, okay. So it looks like it's without war, it's like 4-3. I mean, with 4-2.
The recommendation was to
Was to not adopt it.
So, right.
Yes, and what we're saying, it looks like we want to adopt it.
I would say yes, adopt
Yeah,
it.
that's what Lisa, myself, and Aaron.
And
Yes,
Aaron.
we got, okay. That's cool. Okay. Kevin, you might have to help on this next one, the school report card.
Yep.
If you want to, you probably can explain that, but I can.
I don't have that one in front of me.
They
Okay,
just-
well, real
They
quick, yeah.
basically just want to, they just want to change when it's reported, right?
Right, it's real quick, it just seemed logistically hard because the
It goes to
the
the
year,
end of the year.
yeah, the year, the cycle
Until
ends at June 30th. They
And they
want
want
it
to
June
report it
1st,
June 1st.
and they really can't
I
do
don't see
it.
how that's feasible.
It's not.
Right.
I'd get rid of the school report card, but that's not what you're asking.
Yeah,
So
no, I
yes,
just
you
thought
wanna
maybe
change
getting
the
more
date?
insight on it. But that's exactly what it is. If they
Yes.
can't do it, so
No.
I don't know how they're going to do it. So
Yep.
it just seemed like a no-brainer not to. Does anybody else have any other opinion on it? Okay. So we're gonna do that. The pre-K teacher licensure, that was an interesting one. That just felt, let me read the clip notes on that one. Does anybody have a quick, what they want to know?
I was a little confused on this in that it sounds like they encourage them to revise it. And they're asking us about a revision of the statement, right?
It sounded like, again, going back to my notes from and what they had on there, it sounded like the teachers already are doing some of this stuff. But it says our teachers in training need to learn how to teach reading from a scientific perspective instead of memorization. That's for it. The data shows that students in the state of Illinois are not reading at grade level under the current reading instruction. Now, against this resolution, current teacher training programs already offer literacy classes. The language of the resolution is too rigid and does not allow flexibility in case of future advancements in the area of literacy. That was the collective group of the delegates talking for the 2.5 hours. That's what came out of that. That's where they stood. If that helps anybody's.
It's a little stringent for pre-K licensure.
Right. Yeah, that was
They came out with do not.
correct. The recommendation is do not adopt.
I agree.
I would
Yeah,
do
I
not
would-
on that one.
Right. It's 2, we'll give Kevin a half on that one.
Yeah.
Lisa, how about yourself? Okay. Lisa, no. Anybody?
That was good.
Yeah, okay, so we'll follow the recommendation. How about the teacher shortage one? Hang on a minute. That was, to adopt.
That's gonna be a major issue. so.
Yeah, that was, the recommendation is do adopt it, and here's the force, and this will help the teacher shortage issue, with the option to use certified teachers in other areas, the reliance on substitutes, should decrease. Against it, this may, be construed as lowering the bar for future in-class teachers. Our children need educators that are certified in the subject area in which they teach. I'm not a teacher, so Aaron, you take the lead on this.
I think this is one that's almost gonna be out of necessity than anything else. Of course, you want someone certified in the specific content area, but I would take someone that's a certified teacher over a substitute teacher that isn't certified in any content area. So I think it's gonna be a short-term help. So I would say yes.
To do it now. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Okay. E-learning on election day. The recommendation on that is to do adopt it.
And all snow days. That's
Yeah.
Yeah.
That seems, sort of like it's already happening, or it seems
Yeah, I
like
was gonna say
already-
that, wasn't that the whole reason we adopted remote learning? For
Yeah,
snow
you
days?
learning for weather-related days, yes.
So that seems very even on that one. Okay. The local control pandemic one. It's interesting. I don't know why they put 8 in there. The 2 are the same basically. So they're telling you to adopt 7, 8. They're saying do not adopt because it's exactly what 7 is.
Yeah. Maybe
So
they just like the group from 7 better. or
Yeah,
something.
exactly. Yeah, or they want to make 8 feel like, hey, we're still taking it up. So what's your thoughts on local control during a pandemic? The recommendation is do adopt. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, it's what we've been doing tonight with.
Yeah,
controlling
I
our
would say
numbers.
yes, because especially when we might get to a point where we're gonna want to make our own decisions.
Right.
So.
Well, and we do have to make our decisions based on our population, because it is different. I mean, parents and community members may not have access to all the information, but we know we have access to more information, so I think it's better to leave it in the local control.
Lisa? Okay, everybody else?
Yes.
Okay. The last one is just reaffirmations of existing positions, the renewal of charters. The first one, I'm not sure why, and all 3 of them are do adopt. I'm not sure why they do this reaffirmation of existing stuff. I don't know, is that almost like, on the ballot of Hall of Fame that you're still kind of there, you haven't got enough votes to continue on, or that type of thing?
Chartered, I just wondered if that was
Yeah.
more of a political stance.
Right, let me
Because it's such a topic every year.
I think my reading of it, Aaron, and having read these for a few years now, it's more about the funding, how the funding is affecting the public school and how much the public school has to pay when the charter school takes the money assigned to that student. and who the charter school has to serve. So it's some financials.
Yeah, all three of these next resolutions, there were no arguments from any school against them. So everybody's basically said, adopt, adopt. Not saying we have to, but I'm just sure that, but Lisa, you are correct. It's basically what most of them have with the charter schools is that the school that is, the charter money is taking money away, that school still has some voice, in that process, which makes sense.
How will we impact the school? I mean, if it's not a charter school, just like a public, how,
I don't know that there's any charter high schools around here.
Well,
I-
Fremont Township's the example.
Yeah, with Woodland or whatever, not Woodland.
Prairie Crossing.
Prairie Crossing.
Okay, that's the elementary school that I know as a charter school. But when they take a student that might not be in their specific district, they take the funding of that child to that school, so that school loses that funding.
Yep.
okay. Okay.
The-
So, I mean, I think that we have nothing around here that, will impact us, but we have to support that.
It doesn't impact us at all, but unless something comes in and wants to do a
Yeah,
charter,
they
then
have
it
a
would.
charter.
Yeah.
Their state program in the K-12.
Yeah. It's basically all the schools sticking together against the charters. Kind of.
What was that? 4 years ago? 4 years or 5 years ago, we had a group coming to present.
The last is the new belief statement regarding equity. We talked a lot about that, and it's to do adopt as a recommendation. So I would be shocked if people say do not adopt.
Right.
Anybody have any thoughts on that one?
Yes.
Okay, Lisa? Okay, that is it. The votes, I will vote on behalf of us on the 14th this Saturday.
All right,
Pardon?
thank you, Tom.
Exactly. I'll be so excited.
So last one that we have for open session right now then, Lisa, the update on board policy 712, racial and educational equity development.
Yeah, so as a reminder, what we have done is we took some examples that Kevin and others found, and we took a few and kind of picked the best parts of them. And what is in your packet is one that is kind of a merger and with a little bit of adoption to make it specific to Mundelein High School. And so our conversation last time was, can we have you guys read it? Give us some sense of, is this going the right direction? Any particular or specific feedback you might have? We also discussed the fact that this might be something we want to do in partnership with District 75. And they are not as far along in the equity conversation as where we are. So now that you've had a chance to read it, if you have, then you can kind of share more thinking on whether we think we're in the ballpark or whether we want to slow down and make an opportunity to get in step with District 75. They have been entertaining the idea of having a facilitator help them in this space. And we could use that same approach, or we may decide that we have done enough work in this area and are far enough along that we don't need a facilitator. So any thoughts?
I thought that overall you did a really good job of kind of merging things together. One note that I made on the second page there was the two that you had highlighted in blue with some of your own questions on. I just wondered if those two bullet points could be merged into one point, because it seemed like they're both sort of talking about and addressing implementing some sort of framework into the school curriculum. So I thought maybe those could be kind of weaved into one thing.
Great, thank you.
I would say going with the first one with the curriculum too, what does this actually mean and how would we do this? Those were the good questions, like how would you determine it?
Are you, so you're kind of seconding the question, Laura, is that right? That we would want to ask, what does it really mean to implement it?
How would we implement it?
Well, I think maybe getting back to what Tom brought up earlier about trying to figure out some sort of new course. I think that falls right in line with what that goal would be. And that would kind of fall into the task of, so what kind of course do we want to implement that could address some of this?
Well, in the policy, we would want to have kind of statements that give us the structure and declare what we want, that would then lead to, or it would be a logical progression then that we would create coursework. I don't know that we need to define the coursework while we're designing the policy, is my point. We would want this to suggest that coursework is appropriate or supported or called for.
Lisa, I have a quick question. First off, thank you so much for doing this. It's definitely needed a lot in all schools. But for us, is there a way to end this policy to put so the August 22 doesn't fall through the cracks that we target? Make sure it's in there. I don't know if that's possible in a policy to just have a start date, ready to go.
Well, I would look at them at two different things. I mean, the things I think that we've seen in policy, it's referencing an annual event. So something where annually we're looking at content or curriculum development that would be related to equity. Might be something that you put in there. We do that annually. We got to present that to you. So that's similar to other things that we've done. I think the second we start narrowing down what you're looking for us to be able to do or pinpointing a date, it's setting up both of us to not be successful on that count. Just because those
And I'm
dates
not
change.
trying to go that route. I'm just trying to think of a way to, how do we ensure that I guess Anthony probably has notes, I guess, to follow up on all that stuff for a possible course in August of 22.
So our next step with our student group is going to be to meet with them in January or February to develop that further. And then it's important for our students to be able to start meeting with Stacy. She's in charge of our curriculum, and working with our department chairs and getting them in front of our students and getting more feedback to see what is practical for us to be able to get put into place based off of the feedback we're getting for our students. So I think we've got a structure in place. I'm confident that we're going to be working towards that. It's something that we all believe administratively. I can speak for Stacy when we talk about meeting with our kids and wanting to make it more culturally relevant for our students, all of our students. That is what we want to see happen. So
when it comes to policy, we do have other policies that state that the superintendent is responsible for making sure that there is an annual review of content or a presentation to the board on coursework that is aligned with this policy, for example.
Yeah.
So that might be the policy piece of it.
So I think,
The one question I would have I feel like we're fairly far along in the process of equity and talking about this. Now, does District 75, they want to go with a facilitator? Kevin?
they're leaning more towards that route.
Okay. Do we want to try and align with them? Like what's the feel of? Yeah, I think we should be aligned because it might take them a little longer to get to where we are if they need to do a little catch up. So is there any feelings on that?
My suggestion with being in both board meetings is both boards said there's still parts that are individual to each board. Your policies are not the same. I think what's important right now, you as a board are clearly ready to start moving forward with this policy to some extent. I'd say move forward with that. What I would suggest is Lisa and Laura reach out to Wells or Lisa St. Clair at 75, let them know you're also working on this. And at some point, we want to be able to see where they're at. Let's do that. But I would not have I would not recommend 120 wait on doing something with this policy until 75 is done. If they want to have somebody from 75 have a D120 board member rep that was part of it participate, maybe that's an option so they can keep feedback. But right now, I mean, there's still two separate districts. We serve one community, that's the common, but you've got your own student base that you're also serving. So
Okay. Just so that they can see what we've come up with, because like I said, I feel like we're a little farther along the process, so, you know, if they're looking for what are we doing, so they can just see examples and whatnot. That might be helpful.
Yep, certainly an option. Okay.
So I would take the feedback that you have here, maybe touch base with Laura Mellon, who is partnering me with me on this, and give you guys a policy. Is that a first read? Are we that close, or do we need more discussion or more review?
I would think you could go to a first reading.
I really like it. I really like how you combined it. I think you're very close.
So we're in the ballpark, and now we just do some cleanup and refinement, add some references. Is this something where we should get a legal review?
When you tell me you're ready, we'll send it to Dawn.
Okay.
Yep.
All righty. I will take this with Laura Mellon. And as part of that process, we'll reach out to District 75 and get it into first read ready shape.
Okay, thank you, Lisa, for putting that up.
Thank you.
First job.
Welcome.
Lord, it's yours.
Executive session. Oh, no, sorry. Lost my place in my paperwork. Okay, so the next thing will be the board action items. So the first one is the 2020 estimated property tax levy. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education of Mundelein High School District 120 accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the 2020 estimated property tax levy as presented.
So
Waymet? Tom, was that you? Did you make the motion?
and Sarah, seconded.
So Waymet? Davalos? Rastrelli? Wellington? Yaffe, yes. Vote?
Okay, the next one is Article 5, Memorandum of Understanding. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education of Mundelein High School District 120 to accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the Memorandum of Understanding regarding Article 5, Certificated Employee Evaluation in the 2020 to 2022 Mundelein Education Association contract as presented.
So moved. I didn't hear you.
I'm gonna go, Peter had the first and Aaron Wellington had the second.
Rastrelli? Wellington?
I don't have it.
Yes. Vote?
Yeah.
Davalos?
Yeah.
Waymet?
Okay, the next one is the 2021-2022 course guide. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education of Mundelein High School District 120 to accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve as presented. Seconded.
That was Davalos?
Yes.
Vote? Waymet? Rastrelli? Wellington? Yaffe, yes.
Right, last one, school board policy 680, second and final reading. Recommended motion that the Board of Education of Mundelein High School District 120 to accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve school board policy 680 as presented. I have a motion.
So moved. Second.
Was that Wellington? Rastrelli? Yaffe, yes. Vote? Davalos? And Waymet? Okay.
What we have is the executive session. So we need to adjourn for the employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the public body or legal counsel for the public body, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against employee of the public body or against legal counsel for the public body to determine its validity. Litigation when an action against, affecting, or on behalf of the particular public body has been filed and is pending before a court or administrative tribunal, or when the public body finds that an action is probable or imminent, in which case the basis for the finding shall be recorded and entered into the minutes of the closed meeting. And discussion of minutes of meetings lawfully closed under the Open Meetings Act, whether for proposed approval by the body of the minutes or the semi-annual review of the minutes as mandated by section 2.06. Action may be taken as a result of executive session. So we need to adjourn our open meeting. And I will adjourn it at what time is it?
9:21.
At 9:21. All right.
Are you take,
I need,
Yeah, motion.
we need a motion, sorry. Seconded.
Rastrelli? Vote? Davalos? Wimet? Wellington? Yaffe, yes.
Are we staying here?
Stay here.
Okay.
We're gonna stay in here.
Okay.
I'll shut everything
Yeah.
down.
Sit right there.
Good night, Anthony.
Jerry back?
There she is.
All right, so I have a motion to back into open session at 9:50.
So moved.
Second. Unmute yourself, Lisa.
Who was first?
Peter.
Peter,
Rastrelli? Davalos? Mellon? I can't hear you guys. Wimet?
Yes.
Wellington?
Yes.
Yaffe, yes. Vote?
I'm yelling. Okay, so the action taken as a result of executive session is the executive session minutes. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education of Mundelein High School District 120 accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the executive session minutes for September 8th, 2020 revised and October 6th, 2020. May I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Who was that? Sorry.
Aaron was first, Peter was second.
Wellington?
Yes.
Rastrelli? Yaffe, yes. Vote? Davalos? Wimet?
Okay, the next thing on the agenda is the president's prerogative. Just a couple things, we talked about most of the things that we needed to talk to about the AAA and the delegates voting, but I also wanted to just say thank you to all of you guys for, I know Peter and Aaron, when you probably got signed up for this, you had no idea what you were in for. Those of you who were already on, I don't think anyone knew it was coming, but thanks for the extra time, and Lisa too, the time that people have spent putting in towards committees and getting informed and, just being a calming presence in the community, because I know right now it's just been really challenging. You get all those emails and there's a lot of different opinions of what's going on. So our community has been great, and I think it's partially because our board members are out there sending a message that we're thinking about them. The other thing is we also have a shared services meeting. I just kind of want to give everybody an FYI. Thursday?
So yes.
So the shared, do you want to address that just a little bit, what the meeting's about?
Sure.
Okay. So Laura Mellon and I were on the original committee for shared services, and Tom was in parts of it too. You always got the updates, but Tom was in, John dumped him here and there for a couple of interesting meetings. But so the next, we're having a meeting about shared services, and I'll let Kevin discuss a little bit about it.
So the shared services meeting that's scheduled is designed because in the original agreement, all three parties, being District 75, District 120, and myself, agreed the shared services would go at least a minimum of 2 years. At the end of which time, which is now, we're in the halfway through, we need to get together with a smaller group at least and say, do we want to continue this partnership, all three parties, or not? And then if it is, just reaffirming that for the rest of the boards at the next meeting, because nothing would change in the contract. Or if there was something where we felt that we wanted to modify with the program, or if one of the parties didn't think the shared service model was working, that will be the time as a smaller group, we'd identify that, and then I'd go back to a larger group. With meaning, we'd need to go back to a joint meeting would be my recommendation to work through that. So the meeting on Thursday is that first step. If you're able to go through, do you want 20 reps? What do you think? Do you want 75 reps? What do you think? Myers, what are you thinking? And we'll go from there.
What time in here? I would assume?
Here?
6 o'clock, and it will be here,
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken. And I think we're gonna have just two of us, Laura Valen and I are gonna attend right
Yeah.
now, and we will,
We're looking at Holly and Erickson, the original reps that were for the shared services group.
and Aaron, I don't know, we kind of went through like almost a year-long process with Dale.
Truding.
Oh.
Truding.
With going through the process of, because there isn't that many shared services models, and I'm just kind of trying to bring you a little up to date on it because it's kind of unusual. Lake Forest has done it, and I'm sure you've heard it, and they had some people come in and talk to us, some of the good things about it, some of the bumpy parts that can happen. And we've done kind of a lot of groundwork to make it work because we felt when Andy Hendrickson left this district, it made sense. But just kind of going back over that. So if you have any questions about that, Laura Mellon or myself or Tom are good resources because we all were pretty involved in the process. Or Kevin. for that.
Or you want, if you have time, that declaration, when we met, we put that declaration
Yeah,
together.
totally.
You can certainly go through that and that'll give you a good backbone for what to kind of ask questions on.
Because with the next election coming up and there's quite a, there could be changes. So.
Yep.
Anything to add, Lisa? Any questions? It's getting late and I think we covered a lot of ground tonight.
Yep.
So,
Can I just real quick?
yeah.
I want to say, I've enjoyed working on the metrics committee. It's been, it is every week. And it's at least an hour and sometimes it's beyond that and it's right at 11 o'clock usually, but it has been I think it's been a real positive experience. Not just for me personally, but to work collaboratively with different people on a really challenging, complicated situation. And every single time, I think for the most part, we walk into that and we walk out of it in the same mindset. It's been really good.
Well, I would say that too. I think this board has been the most involved in seeing how decisions are made, so that you can understand what's going on behind the scenes. Because there's so much work that goes into the decisions that are made, especially during this pandemic. So I said I've been on the building committee with the safety procedures with Kevin Quinn, and it really was an eye-opening experience. And I jumped in on Stacy's committee once to see just technologically what we all need. Because people think it's so easy to jump back and forth through. Thank God we have technology, but as you said, you go in there and you really get the full depth and scope, and you're working with people trying to make it a good experience for our students. So again, that was part of my thanks for everybody putting in that extra time, because I know it is, and I know everybody's got their own kids and things going on. So
So since it's been enjoyable, and I know not all of them have been meeting since the last time, the steering committee meeting meets every Tuesday at 7:30. And that's one of the groups where we funnel in the information that's happening, whether it's from the metrics committee and the buildings and grounds committee, that the issues that we're trying to resolve and work through take place with representation from classified staff, certified staff, and admin. So we're starting to get into some of those topics more. Like this morning, we had that discussion about staff returning, and we need to start having that conversation. That was the group we initiated that with. As we were sitting there going through that, I'm thinking it's appropriate. We should have a board member on there if somebody's willing to do that. It's every Tuesday, 7:30 to 8:30 is the schedule for it. It usually goes to 8:40. There is a hard stop time because staff have to get to class by 8:50. So if anybody's interested and wants to be able to participate in that, I'd ask that it would be something that we could be consistent with. It's helpful because you get the continuity of the conversations. That's spots open. Next meeting is Tuesday, 7:30.
Sign me up.
Time's on. All right. And last, before you go, Laura, you said it well. I feel bad for when Peter's called and Aaron called and you talked about what to expect. You know what? When I signed up to be a superintendent, I never expected I'd be doing this either. And it's certainly been unique times. And most importantly, November 15th is the School Board Member Appreciation Day. And the service that all of you provide goes without standing, that you're a credit to our district and our community. You're here doing a civic duty because of your belief you have in your community and your school district. And I can tell you from an administrative standpoint, without your support and guidance, we couldn't be able to do the work that we're doing from an administrative point, also working with our staff. Because when we're able to work together, we're setting the stage and foundation for how we work together with our staff. And I think that's evident. And Peter, what you just described with the metrics committee and Laura, you with the building team, that is a reflection of who we are as a district. And that's because of you as board members have empowered us to be able to do that. So with that, a small token of appreciation is thanks. Also want to be able to give you some certificates before you leave tonight. I want you to know how truly appreciative your admin team is and our staff are, that you're the board leading our district through this pandemic and even beyond. So thank you very much.
All right, and on that note, let's adjourn the meeting. Woohoo! Okay, may I have a motion to adjourn at 10 o'clock?
Second.
Was that Wimette?
Davalos and Wellington.
Garrett Wellington? Jaffe, yes. Votes?
Yes.
Davalos? Estrelli?
Yes. Thank you. Wax stamp or
Yeah.
something?
That's neat. Honoring the most.